Chapter 2266. Revelation Formation. Let's continue forward. This little guy is starting to get restless. I'm afraid the real treasures are at the end of the starry sky path. The hidden spirit fox in Ma Yujia's palm started to squeak. Its body twisted and turned restlessly. Ma Yujia released his palm. The hidden spirit fox immediately squeaked and turned into a ray of light. It instantly disappeared and rushed toward the starry sky path. Zhuowen and Ma Yujin naturally followed closely behind. Their eyes were filled with eagerness. Of course, other than eagerness, there was also vigilance and alertness. Although they knew that there was likely to be precious treasures at the other end of the starry sky path, they didn't lose their minds. High rewards were often accompanied by high risks. Zhuowen naturally understood this principle, and Ma Yujia was no exception. The two of them walked on the starry sky path at a moderate speed. Even if the hidden spirit fox in front of them was restless and impatient, Ma Yujia forcibly suppressed it and slowed down. About 4 hours later, the two of them were still walking on the starry sky path. On both sides of the path were numerous stars, suns, and moons that stretched as far as the eye could see. It gave people the feeling that they were strolling in the boundless starry sky. Boom, boom, boom. Suddenly, extremely terrifying tremors came from the originally smooth, starry sky path. Because the tremors came too suddenly, Zhuowen and Ma Yujia both couldn't stand steadily and almost fell to the ground. "What's going on?" Zhuowen asked with a gloomy expression. "Brother Zhuo, it seems like we're in trouble." Ma Yujia's gaze was gloomy as he looked at both sides of the starry sky path. Zhuowen followed Ma Yujia's gaze, and his pupils shrank. He discovered that the stars on both sides of the starry sky path were rushing toward them like rain. Each star represented a star with a terrifying temperature. The temperature of a star was definitely much higher than most flames. Cultivators below the void sky realm would undoubtedly die if they were to be surrounded by a star. Facing so many stars colliding, even a powerful void sky expert would be in danger of dying. "Brother Zhuo, take out the everlasting ice lotus. Otherwise, we'll all die here," Ma Yujia suddenly shouted. Even without Ma Yujia's words, Zhuowen had already brought out the everlasting ice lotus. A crystal-clear ice lotus bloomed from Zhuowen's palm. It then expanded to a size of several tens of meters, protecting Zhuowen and Ma Yujia within its stamen. Since the everlasting ice lotus had been completely refined by Zhuowen, although the ice lotus cold chi was terrifying, it was basically within the range of Zhuowen's control. Naturally, it couldn't hurt Zhuowen and Ma Yujia. Boom, boom. The moment the everlasting ice lotus was summoned, the first star that came crashing down ruthlessly. The star was like a gigantic fireball that had been magnified countless times. When the star struck the ice lotus, the magma that had been condensed in the star was completely dispersed, gushing out like a flood that had broken through a dam. It was exceptionally terrifying. Can you imagine the scene of a magma larger than the entire planet pouring out? Zhuowen's face was a little ugly. The temperature of the star was just too high. Even the everlasting ice lotus's defense had weakened under the impact just now. Fortunately, the everlasting ice lotus contained the ice origin. Although the everlasting ice lotus had been damaged by the collision of the star, with the ice origin, the everlasting ice lotus could recover very quickly. However, Zhuowen couldn't guarantee that the everlasting ice lotus will be able to withstand the bombardment of a series of stars from behind. Even if the ice origin endowed the everlasting ice lotus with terrifying cold chi and super recovery ability, with so many stars bombarding it at the same time, the everlasting ice lotus might not even be able to recover in time before it was blasted to smithereens. Boom, boom, boom. The moment the first star struck, the following stars bombarded it at an extremely fast speed. The entire everlasting ice lotus began to tremble under the violent bombardment, and countless cracks appeared on the surface of the ice lotus. Zhuowen's pupils shrank. He looked at Ma Yujia and said in a deep voice, "The everlasting ice lotus won't last long. Do as you see fit." In addition to the everlasting ice lotus, Zhuowen naturally had other trump cards. However, Zhuowen wasn't the kind of person who liked to suffer losses. This Mayuya hadn't done anything yet, so he couldn't let Zhuowen block the surrounding terrifying stars alone. Mayuya nodded and immediately took out 81 palm-sized golden array discs from his spirit ring. Immediately after, he waved his sleeve and a terrifying divine sense lingered on the array discs. Blazing golden patterns erupted from the array discs, and immediately, 81 array discs fell around the everlasting ice lotus. Immediately afterward, Zhuowen found that the potential of the ice origin inside the everlasting ice lotus was all forced out by the array discs. The ice lotus, which was originally only a few dozen feet long, at this moment, under the stimulation of the array discs, grew wildly and directly turned into a huge ice lotus that was hundreds of feet long. The cold air gushing out was as thick and huge as an ice dragon. The power of the everlasting ice lotus increased sharply and finally blocked the countless stars outside. Zhuowen, who was inside, could clearly see the stars smashing into the surface of the ice lotus, shattering into countless streams of magma that gushed out in all directions. They were like dazzling fireworks that bloomed with extremely dazzling brilliance. What kind of array is this? Zhuowen looked at the 81 array discs inlaid inside the ice lotus and asked in surprise. This is a revelation array. It can stimulate the most fundamental limit of all power. Your ice origin is already very terrifying, but you are still far from reaching its limit. Now, I am using the revelation array to maximize the power of the ice origin, Mayuya said lightly. Zhuowen nodded. Soon after, he looked at the 81 formation discs around him. He knew that this formation should be a Class 9 formation. Even with Zhuowen's level, he was still unable to see through the specific patterns of the formation discs. This showed just how complex and powerful the formation discs were. Although Zhuowen wanted to ask Mayuya about the details of the revelation array, after all, this thing was absolutely perfect in combination with the everlasting ice lotus. However, he knew that this array should be an important one on Mayuya, and it was unlikely that he would give it to him, so he didn't intend to mention it. The collision of stars lasted for 6 hours and finally came to an end. At this moment, there was no more starlight on both sides of the starry sky path, but only darkness and nothingness. At this moment, the starry sky path was flooded with magma. The path ahead was covered in a thick layer of magma, and the blazing light made people not dare to look at it directly. With the everlasting ice lotus, the magma on the path didn't hinder them too much. After all, the cold air of the everlasting ice lotus was enough to freeze the magma, forming a hard, pitch-black path. The two of them spent another 2 hours and finally reached the end of the starry sky path. At the end of the starry sky path was a huge white arch door. This arched door wasn't closed, but hollow. On the other side of the white arch door was an ordinary cliff, and at the top of the cliff was a bright blood-red color. Chapter 2267. Blood-stained cliff. The moment Zhuowen's gaze fell on the scarlet at the top of the cliff, he felt the blood in his entire body boil. Zhuowen hurriedly suppressed the restlessness of his qi and blood. He noticed that Mayuya, who was beside him, was also trembling slightly. Clearly, the latter had also felt the strangeness of the bright red color at the top of the cliff. That's blood. Mayuya narrowed his eyes and muttered in a low voice as if he was sleep-talking. Zhuowen's heart shook. He looked at the blood on the cliff in the distance, and his gaze became a little more dignified. Just as Mayuya said, the scarlet on the cliff was blood. This was a blood-stained cliff. However, what shocked Zhuowen was that the blood on the cliff actually gave him such a powerful impact that it actually affected the blood in his body. One must know that with Zhuowen's current strength, he was definitely one of the top experts in the Great Brahma domain. However, Zhuowen only took a glance at the blood-stained cliff just now, and his blood couldn't help but jump as if it was about to leave his body. He hadn't felt this way for a long time. Just the blood alone could affect experts at his and Mayuya's level. Then, just how terrifyingly powerful was the owner of the blood when he was alive? Let's go in. A rare serious expression appeared on Ma Yujie's face, and he no longer had the sloppy appearance from before. Zhuowen nodded, and the two entered the arched door side by side. As for Ma Yujie's seven-tailed spirit fox, when they arrived, it hid in Ma Yujie's arms and began to tremble. This little guy was extremely excited at the beginning, but now that they had arrived at a treasured land, it was scared instead. Zhuowen found it funny, but this also showed that this was not only a treasured land, but also a place of danger. Boom! The moment Zhuowen and Ma Yujie entered the arched door, their pupils shrank to the size of needles. They only felt an earth-shattering pressure that suddenly crushed their bodies, making it difficult for them to breathe. Under this pressure, Jihong contained a peerless killing intent. Terrifying killing intent constantly battered their spirits, as if it wanted to shatter their spirits completely. Zhuowen growled, and the more than 6,000 soul galaxies in his soul operated together. A terrifying divine sense burst out, resisting the killing intent that wanted to drill into his soul like a maggot. Although Zhuowen's soul was terrifying, this killing intent was even more terrifying. It instantly broke through the defense set up by Zhuowen's soul and entered his soul space. Soul kill. Zhuowen's face went grim, and he didn't hesitate in the slightest to execute his soul secret skill, soul kill. A shapeless divine sense fluctuation was like a tempestuous wave as it fiercely slapped out, and it gave rise to layer upon layer of high waves that carried the might to annihilate the world. The soul-killing technique was indeed powerful. Originally, the killing intent that had smashed into Zhuowen's soul like a hot knife through butter was completely blocked by this soul-killing pole. Even Zhuowen could not help but admire the genius of the faceless woman. She had actually created such a terrifying skill like the soul kill soul. This soul kill soul could definitely be regarded as the most powerful skill of the soul. Only this soul kill soul could exert such a powerful power. This kind of enhancement was not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2, but an exponential increase. Once the soul kill soul was used, Zhuowen's soul would become extremely powerful. Of course, the consumption of the soul kill soul was not small for Zhuowen. However, Zhuowen had the heavenly domain starry sky essence, so he was not afraid of consumption. After barely blocking the soul kill soul, Zhuowen cast a sidelong glance at Ma Yujie beside him. He found that although this damn fatty's face was slightly pale, he was not seriously injured. He knew that this damn fatty's trump card was not weaker than his. Ma Yujie naturally also noticed the safe and sound Zhuowen. He was shocked in his heart. Just now, he had personally experienced how terrifying the soul kill soul was. Even an ordinary powerhouse at the peak of the 7th step of the Void Sky realm would fall under that soul kill soul. However, except for his pale face, Zhuowen was safe and sound. It could be seen that Zhuowen's soul was not weaker than his. Brother Zhuo, you found it. This soul kill soul is coming from that cliff, Ma Yujie suddenly said. Zhuowen took a deep breath. His gaze fell on the cliff in front of him. To be more precise, his attention fell on the blood-red color at the top of the cliff. This was because he could clearly feel that the soul kill soul was coming from that blood. Whose blood is this? After staining the cliff with blood, it can still erupt with such terrifying soul kills, soul kill. This! Zhuowen felt as if he was choking. He was extremely shocked. Ma Yujie also said solemnly, I suspect that the owner of this blood is at least an expert of the two extremes of life and death. He might even be an expert of the Tao affirmation realm. Zhuowen's gaze became even more serious. He had heard the Devouring King mention that the two extremes of life and death was the consummate stage of the 9 steps of the Void Sky. The 9 steps of the Void Sky had a total of 3 minor stages. They were the Life Comprehension Realm, the Death Comprehension Realm, and the Life and Death Extremes. The Life and Death Extremes were considered consummate stages of the 9 steps of the Void Sky. It was said that if one wanted to advance from the 9 steps of the Void Sky to the Heaven-Crushing Realm, one would have to prove one's Tao. Of course, Zhuowen didn't know the specific method of proving one's Tao. After all, he was still very far away from the 9 steps of the void sky, let alone proving one's Tao. However, what surprised Zhuan was that this damn fatty beside him seemed to know a lot about proving one's Tao. This made Zhuan even more curious about this fatty's origins. Regardless of whether it's a supreme expert of the 2 extremes of life and death or a Tao-confirming expert, they are all absolute peak experts. Such experts are actually stained with blood on this cliff. Who did this? Zhuan asked doubtfully. However, Ma Yu just shook his head and said, I'm not sure. An expert of this level has already surpassed the level that we can come into contact with. However, I know that if such a powerful expert died on this cliff, then this cliff must be extraordinary. But it's also very dangerous, Zhuan said coldly. Ma Yujin nodded and said calmly, Brother Zhua, if you're scared, you can stay where you are. In any case, I can't just sit here and wait for death. At the very least, I have to go over and take a look. Moreover, looking at the condition of the cliff, it's obvious that an extremely long time has passed, and the danger has already decreased. After saying this, Ma Yujie ignored Zhuan and continued forward. Zhuan couldn't help but chuckle, and he didn't argue with Ma Yujie. Instead, he silently followed behind Ma Yujie. The arch door was only about 500 meters away from the cliff, but Zhuan and Ma Yujie walked and stopped, and it took them an entire half a day before they finally arrived in front of the cliff. One had to realize that as the 2 of them continued to approach, the might that emanated from the blood-stained cliff became more and more terrifying. In particular, the killing intent that was mixed within the might was simply too terrifying. Chapter 2268. Blood of a True Dragon, of course. In the midst of such killing intent, Zhuan did not waste this opportunity. Instead, he silently operated the celestial star meditation diagram, using the terrifying killing intent as a medium to temper his soul. Moreover, the tempering effect of the killing intent was exceptionally good. In just half a day, the number of divine soul galaxies in his soul space had once again increased by about 1,000. In other words, there were more than 7,000 divine soul galaxies in Zhuan's soul space, and his soul space was much more condensed and powerful than before. Although the killing intent on the bloodstained cliff was more terrifying than before, Zhuan was not as embarrassed as he was at the beginning. Dealing with this killing intent had become somewhat easy. Not only Zhuan, but Ma Yujie, the fatty, was also much more comfortable at this time. Obviously, this guy's ability to adapt was not weaker than Zhuan's. Approaching the cliff, the 2 found that the front of the cliff was concave inwards. In the concave area, there was a blood pool more than 30 meters in size. Many blood-colored bubbles appeared on the surface of the blood pool, just like the scene after water boiled. Moreover, Zhuan discovered that the pool of blood did not emit any smell of blood. Instead, it had a refreshing fragrance. It was like the faint fragrance of osmanthus flowers in full bloom. It made people feel relaxed and happy just by smelling it. Zhuan looked at the blood pool strangely, while Ma Yujie's eyes lit up and he rushed towards the blood pool. Although Zhuan did not know what this blood pool was, seeing Ma Yujie rush out like a wolf, he naturally did not want to be outdone. This is the blood of a true dragon, blood that can emit the fragrance of osmanthus flowers. Apart from the blood of a true dragon, I can't think of any other blood that can emit such a fragrance. Ma Yujie came to the side of the blood pool, trembling a little, and immediately took out a jade bottle from his spirit ring, carefully filling it with blood from the blood pool. Zhuan looked at the excited Ma Yujie in surprise. Compared to this fatty who was experienced and knowledgeable, Zhuan's knowledge was indeed much shorter. But even if he was not as knowledgeable as Ma Yujie, he knew the value of true dragon blood. The dragon clan was really rare. A long, long time ago, the dragon clan represented power and power. At that time, humans could only look up to the dragon clan. Even the devouring clan was afraid of the dragon clan. In the prosperous era of the dragon clan, the devouring clan was like a mouse. They could only hide in the dark and didn't dare to show up. Of course, only the king of the devouring clan could compare to the dragon clan. However, he could only be compared to an ordinary dragon. If the king of the dragon race were to appear, the devouring king wouldn't even be a match for him. However, as the dragon clan gradually withdrew from the stage of history, the human clan began to grow stronger and became the masters of this starry sky. The cosmos outside the eight heavens was boundless, many times larger than the eight heavens. There were even legends that said that the dragon race had left the eight heavens and entered the cosmos. However, this was just a rumor. Now, everyone knew that as long as one was a void sky cultivator, they had the ability to fly into outer space. However, the cosmos was too big. No void sky cultivator could find a new world in outer space. They could only see abandoned planets in outer space. They were like garbage dumps, dilapidated. One could imagine how precious true dragon blood was for such a powerful dragon clan. You don't plan to take all of the true dragon blood? Zhuowen looked at Ma Yujia, who carefully filled a bottle of true dragon blood and didn't do anything else, and asked in surprise. Ma Yujia was expressionless. He said indifferently, "You can only take one bottle of true dragon blood. If you don't believe me, you can try." Zhuowen stared blankly for a moment before taking out 3 jade bottles from his spirit ring in disbelief. He then filled all 3 jade bottles to the brim with true dragon blood. However, when Zhuowen opened the 3 jade bottles again, he discovered that only one of them contained true dragon blood. The other 2 jade bottles were empty. Zhuowen knew that Ma Yujia wasn't lying. He really could only take 1 bottle of true dragon blood. Looks like it was a true dragon that fell here all those years ago. No wonder this blood-stained cliff actually possesses such terrifying pressure and killing intent. Zhuowen put away the true dragon's blood and sighed with emotion. "You're wrong. The blood on the cliff isn't the true dragon's, it's the humans. If I'm not wrong, this true dragon was slaughtered by this person. However, I don't know why this person stained this place with blood." Ma Yujia shook his head. Hearing this, Zhuowen didn't refute. He always felt that this fatty should know something about this place, but this guy didn't tell him the truth. "Brother Zhuo, I'm going to the back to take a look. Do you want to come with me?" Ma Yujia suddenly looked at Zhuowen and asked. Zhuowen shook his head and said, "You go first. I'll wait here for a while." Ma Yujia nodded and walked towards the back of the cliff. Zhuowen followed the blood pool and came to the innermost part of the depression. He raised his head and stared at the sunken cliff in front of him. His eyes became much deeper. He could see that the sunken part of the cliff should have been caused by a giant sword. At the edge of the depression, he saw a deep and bottomless dark abyss. In the abyss, it was dark. Even Zhuowen's divine sense couldn't detect how deep it was. Zhuowen could totally imagine that the divine sword that had pierced the cliff out of the abyss must have been extremely powerful. Rumble. Suddenly, the originally quiet cliff trembled violently. Countless gravel fell from the top of the cliff, and the earth shook. Zhuowen stood unsteadily and almost fell into the abyss in front of him. Fortunately, his reaction was fast enough. He immediately took out the king's sword and stabbed it into the cliff in front of him. Zhuowen looked down and was shocked to find that in the depths of the abyss, a pair of faintly discernible eyes exuded a faint blue light, staring straight at Zhuowen. Thump! 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 Suddenly, the dull sound of a heartbeat resounded around the cliff. Zhuowen turned his head abruptly and discovered that the surface of the blood pool behind him was splashing water in all directions. Within the blood pool, a heart that was at least 10 feet in size gradually floated to the surface of the water. Zhuowen's eyes were extremely sharp. He could see at a glance that the surface of the giant heart was actually covered with a dense swarm of red bugs. These bugs were too disgusting. They were grotesquely shaped, and their bodies were covered with blood-red mucus. Moreover, there were many of them. The entire heart was wrapped up by these red bugs, and Zhuowen could only see the outline of the heart. Moreover, every time the heart beat, the terrifying power that erupted from it could kill a large number of the red insects that covered its surface. Chapter 2269. Give me back my heart. Give me back my eyes. Give me back my arms. Give me back my legs. Give me back everything. Just as Zhuowen was looking at the gigantic heart that was surrounded by countless bugs in shock, a faintly discernible voice quietly reverberated in Zhuowen's ears. The voice sounded like it was talking in its sleep, but it also sounded like it was chanting. Zhuowen could hear the grief and pain in the voice clearly from afar. Give me back my heart. Give me back my eyes. Give me back my arms. Give me back my legs. Give me back everything. The voice rang out once again, deep in Zhuowen's mind. Zhuowen growled and immediately used the soul-slaying technique, barely dispelling the voice. However, his ears could still clearly hear the mournful voice, as if he was hearing the howling of a wild ghost in a graveyard. Zhuowen immediately spread his torch dragon wings and left the place, flying towards the back of the cliff. He felt that it was impossible for something to happen to the cliff for no reason. It was definitely the work of that damned fatty. When Zhuowen arrived at the back of the cliff, he found that there was no sign of Ma Yujia. It was empty. Give me back my heart. Give me back my eyes. Give me back my arms. Give me back my legs. Give me back everything. The same words appeared once more. But this time, it didn't reverberate by Zhuowen's ears or mind, and it was instead a loud roar that suddenly sounded out from the depths of the cliff. It was like a thunderclap that surged over and was deafening. Because of this loud roar, cracks began to appear on the blood-colored cliff, and it actually began to collapse. The killing intent that filled the surroundings also became more and more terrifying. It was as if the killing intent that was originally suppressed was completely released after that loud roar. What did that damned fatty do? Zhuowen's expression changed drastically. Under this sudden burst of even more powerful killing intent, he had no choice but to retreat repeatedly. He only stopped after retreating 1,000 meters away. His gaze was grave as he stared at the abnormal movement in front of him. Zhuowen was very clear that this situation would not happen for no reason. The only possibility was that someone had triggered some kind of mechanism. Zhuowen immediately thought of Ma Yujia, who went to the back of the cliff and disappeared. He knew that the abnormality of the cliff was definitely related to Ma Yujia. Now that Zhuowen had lost any clues about that damn fatty, and with such a violent change happening at the cliff, Zhuowen knew that he could only wait and see. Zhuowen found a secluded place and silently observed the cliff in front of him. The cliff in front of him kept collapsing. Suddenly, the earth-shattering roar burst out again, and the cliff completely collapsed. Then, Zhuowen found that the huge heart that appeared from the blood of the true dragon suddenly rushed out, wanting to break through the air and escape. Unfortunately, the heart did not fly very far. The countless blood-colored worms in the true dragon's blood tied the heart like chains and slowly pulled it back. Give me back my heart. Give me back my eyes. Give me back my arms. Give me back my legs. Give me back everything. The moment the heart was tied, the roar suddenly burst out, and an invisible sound wave spread out in the space like ripples. Then, Zhuowen's pupils shrank as he found that the space actually stagnated because of the roar. Zhuowen's body seemed to have stopped moving because of the stagnation of the space. He could not move at all. At this moment, if someone wanted to kill Zhuowen, Zhuowen would not be able to resist at all. This time, Zhuowen was really shocked. Just the sound wave alone could reach such a terrifying power. What kind of existence was this guy? Boom! The moment the sound wave stagnated the space, the cliff completely turned into nothingness. Then, Zhuowen found that under the cliff was an endless dark abyss. Then he saw an eyeball. The eyeball was several feet in size. The white of the eyeball was blood-colored, and the pupil was golden. It looked too strange. As soon as the eyeball appeared, blood-colored flames gushed out from the depths of its pupil. The blood-colored flames were like blood arrows. They shot out and hit the blood-colored worms tied to the heart. Boom! The blood-colored flames were very powerful. The worms that formed the chains were instantly broken, and the heart let out a joyful cry, intending to escape. Unfortunately, a terrifying dragon roar erupted from the blood pool. Then, a blood pillar suddenly surged out from the blood pool. If one looked carefully, the blood pillar was not formed by blood water, but by countless blood-colored worms. A huge dragon head rushed out from the blood pillar. The dragon head was also formed by those worms. The dragon head suddenly opened its mouth and swallowed the heart. The huge eyeball roared angrily and rushed out. Waves of terrifying blood-colored flames shot out and fought with the dragon head. The battle between the two was too terrifying. Just the shock waves from the battle were enough to stop the starry sky. It was obvious how powerful the battle between the two was. Zhuowen hid in the distance and watched the battle. He was secretly shocked. Whether it was the dragon head or the eyeball, Zhuowen was no match for them. Even if it was the clone of Devourer King, Zhuowen felt that he would not be able to fight against either of them. This was because Zhuowen found that whether it was the dragon head or the eyeball, every move they made had earth-shaking power. He was all too familiar with this power. It was the power of the heavenly path. Previously, he was embarrassed by Mu Qinxue. Naturally, he was very familiar with the power of the heavenly path. Moreover, Zhuowen faintly found that the two of them were even more proficient in using the heavenly path than Mu Qinxue. It was as if they could control the heavenly path as if it was their own arm. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk just as the dragon head and the eyeball were fighting, a silent figure quietly poked his head out from the abyss below the cliff. Then, this figure came and went without a trace, rushing in a certain direction. Zhuowen's pupils shrank. He immediately recognized this figure. Wasn't it that damn fatty Mayujia? He didn't know when this guy had entered the abyss below the cliff. Moreover, looking at the way this guy was poking his head out, he was probably doing something shameful in there. However, this guy was really something. He was actually able to slip away under the watchful eyes of the dragon head and the eyeball. The two of them didn't notice him at all. The reason Zhuowen wasn't discovered was that he had hidden well in advance. In addition, he was quite a distance away from the cliff. It was understandable that the dragon head and the eyeball didn't notice him. However, that damn fatty had slipped away under their watchful eyes. It was obvious that this guy had used some unknown method to escape the battle between the two. Zhuowen restrained his aura and secretly followed. He wanted to see where this damn fatty was going. Chapter 2270. Powerful soul banner Mayujia was extremely cautious. As he was escaping, he had set up many restrictions behind him. Zhuowen was already a level 8 divine array master. In addition, these restrictions were set up by Mayujia at the last minute. There were many loopholes. Zhuowen deliberately went around these restrictions. After about an hour, Mayujia came to a pagoda monument. This pagoda monument stood on an inconspicuous desert. It looked exactly the same as the pagoda monument at the bottom of the Sun Moon Lake. Zhuowen knew that this pagoda monument was probably a one-way teleportation array to leave this place. This fatty is indeed very familiar with this place. It seems like this is not his first time here. Zhuowen cursed in his heart. From the way this fatty came here so quickly and found the pagoda monument, it could be seen that this fatty was not a newcomer. Mayujia looked around. His powerful divine sense spread out as if he wanted to check if there was anyone around. Zhuowen quickly concealed his aura. He did not want this fatty to find out. After noticing that there was nothing strange in the surroundings, Mayujia muttered softly, "I haven't seen that Zhuowen since I came out. Could it be that he escaped?" Mayujia did not think too much about it. Instead, he started to break the restrictions on the pagoda monument. This time, Mayujia had a hard time breaking the restrictions. Obviously, this pagoda monument was much harder to break than the one he came in with. After 3 days, Mayujia had broken most of the restrictions. Success was imminent. However, his face changed drastically as he looked behind him. Boom, 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 boom. A thunderous sound came from the sky behind Mayujia. Immediately, a huge eyeball came whistling over. In the eyeball, there was monstrous anger as if its parents had died. Damn it! This guy abandoned his own heart and chased after me. This guy, Mayujia's face turned ugly. He took out a golden banner from his spiritual ring. It was a picture of a five-clawed golden dragon on the banner. When Zhuowen saw the picture of the five-clawed golden dragon on the banner, his pupils shrank. The five-clawed golden dragon on the banner was the same as the one he had frozen at the top of the ice tower. The moment the golden banner appeared, the golden light exploded. Then, the five-clawed golden dragon in the banner seemed to come alive. It roared and charged toward the eyeball. Boom! Boom! His eyes were filled with rage, and a monstrous blood-red flame rushed out from the depths of his pupils. The five-clawed golden dragon opened its mouth and spat out a golden flame that was not any weaker. Immediately, the entire region of outer space was filled with blood-red flames and golden flames. They intertwined with each other and constantly collided. It was an extremely terrifying sight. Although the golden flames were powerful, they were still inferior to the blood-red flames. In just 3 breaths of time, the golden flames were suppressed by the blood-red flames and burned into nothingness. Ma Yujie coldly snorted and took out another large banner. This banner was black, and there was also a huge, strange beast engraved on it. Zhuowen stared at it, and his gaze became more solemn and doubtful. What was drawn on the black banner was actually the Devourer King. With Zhuowen's eyesight, he could naturally tell that the Devourer King was the one sealed at the top of the ice tower. When the ice tower shattered, the Devourer King and the five-clawed golden dragon's corpses also shattered and disappeared. However, the 2 banners that the fatty took out had actually drawn the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King. It seemed like the fatty did not explain many things in the ice tower. Zhuowen could also tell that the souls of the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King were sealed inside the 2 banners. Although the souls of these 2 powerful races were not at their peak, they were still not ordinary. They were extremely powerful. If Zhuowen were to face these 2 banners, the chances of him being defeated were still very high. The addition of the Devourer King immediately stabilized the one-sided situation. The combined might of the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King was not something that ordinary cultivators could withstand. The eyeball was terrifying. Perhaps the owner of the eyeball was a supreme expert when he was alive. However, it was only an eyeball now. Its power could not be compared to its peak state. Moreover, even this eyeball was able to suppress the combined might of the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King. Although it could suppress them, the eyeball could not do anything to the 2 souls. At the very least, it could not take down the combined might of the 2 souls for the time being. Ma Yujie let out a sigh of relief. He was extremely wary of this mysterious eyeball. Now that the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King were able to resist this eyeball, it was beyond his expectations. However, he recalled that this eyeball had fought with the true dragon's blood before. It should have lost a lot of power in that battle. Therefore, the power it was displaying now was not as strong as when it first came out from the bottom of the cliff. Ma Yujie no longer cared about this. Instead, he focused on breaking the restrictions on the pagoda's steel in front of him. He knew that he could not stay here for long. Although the eyeball had lost a lot of power in the battle with the true dragon's blood, the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King were currently at a disadvantage. It would not be long before the eyeball could break through the combined might of the 2 souls. These 2 banners were the fatty's strongest trump cards. With these 2 banners, even Su Tianjuden might not be able to kill him. Once these 2 banners were broken through by the eyeball, he knew very well that his chances of dying would greatly increase. Zhuowen watched all of this in silence. He did not go out to help this damn fatty. He knew very well that this damn fatty had definitely obtained something good inside. If he wanted to get some benefits from this damn fatty, he had to pick the right time. Boom! 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 The eyeball was extremely angry. Blood-red flames surged out and formed an incomparably huge flaming hand. This flaming hand was too big, even bigger than the Devourer King and the five-clawed golden dragon. The flaming hand smashed down heavily. Immediately, the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King were blasted away by the flaming hand. The defenses they had set up trembled violently as cracks appeared on the surface of their defenses. Ma Yujie also noticed the abnormality in the defenses, and his face suddenly turned ugly. With his eyesight, he could naturally see that the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King could not hold on for much longer. As for the restrictions on the pagoda steel, he would need another hour to break them. The two souls could not hold on for more than 2 hours. "Brother Ma, do you need this Shua's help?" Just as Ma Yujie was vexed, an indifferent voice slowly sounded. Ma Yujie turned his head and immediately saw a figure rushing over a kilometer away. This figure was extremely fast, instantly bypassing the battlefield where the eyeball was and arriving in front of Ma Yujie. Chapter 2271. Demand, Brother Zhua, you came at the right time. Hurry up and help me. As long as you can block that eyeball for 2 hours, I will be able to completely break the restriction on the pagoda's steel, Ma Yujie said in pleasant surprise. Zhuowen stood in front of Ma Yujie without moving. He just looked at the latter with a smile. Ma Yujie frowned and said, "Brother Zhua, what is the meaning of this? If you don't help, both of us will be left here." Zhuowen smiled faintly and said, "Brother Ma, don't play riddles with me. I can help you, but no matter what, you have to pay me a certain amount of compensation, right?" Ma Yujie's pupils shrank. He said in a deep voice, "Brother Zhua, this is related to our life and death. If you help me, you will be helping yourself." Zhuowen sneered and said, "Brother Ma, if you don't pay me anything, why should I help you? If you don't care, I will leave immediately." After saying that, Zhuowen turned to leave. However, he was stopped by Ma Yujie. Ma Yujie smiled and said, "Brother Zhua, don't be so impulsive. How about this? You help me block that eyeball first. After we leave this place, I will give you the compensation. How about that?" Zhuowen shook his head and said, "You have to give it to me now. Moreover, what I want is the thing you obtained from the bottom of the cliff." Ma Yujie's pupil shrank. His face was ugly as he said, "Brother Zhua, you are really asking for too much. If you don't want it, we could just go our separate ways." Zhuowen said coldly. Ma Yujie's eyes rolled. Just as he was about to say something, a violent rumble came. He saw that the defense of the five-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King was weakening. It would not be long before they were completely broken through. Ma Yujie gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, "I obtained 2 Dao fruits at the bottom of the cliff. I will give you one." After saying that, Ma Yujie took out a brilliant fruit from his spirit ring and handed it to Zhuowen. Zhuowen took the fruit and narrowed his eyes. The fruit was only half the size of a palm. However, the moment Zhuowen touched it, he actually felt a dense Dao rhyme. Moreover, the Dao rhyme contained dense heavenly energy. It was much denser than the heavenly energy from the heavenly blood he obtained from the Luo God Palace ruins. Just this Dao fruit alone had probably surpassed the heavenly Dao blood he'd obtained. Although Zhuowen did not know what the fruit of ways was, he did not show any surprise on his face. Instead, he put the fruit of ways away and looked at Ma Yujie. "Brother Ma, it's impossible for you to have only obtained 2 fruits of ways after staying below the cliff for so long, right?" Ma Yujie cursed in his heart. His eyes flickered and he said with a flattering smile, "Brother Zhe, do you think Dao fruits are cabbages that can be found on the street? They are the fruits condensed by experts at the life and death boundary. They are extremely precious. I'm already very lucky to have obtained 2. Zhuowen still shook his head. Although he did not have much contact with this fatty, he more or less understood this fatty's character. This guy was definitely someone who hid things. Seeing that Zhuowen still did not make a move, Ma Yujie was furious. He took out 2 more Dao fruits from his spirit ring and said coldly, "Brother Zhua, I will take out 2 more Dao fruits. If you still think that I am hiding things, then don't blame me for breaking the pot." Zhuowen frowned slightly. He did not expect Ma Yujie to be so decisive. 3 Dao fruits. Otherwise, I will not make a move, Zhuowen said firmly. He knew that this fatty was very cunning. Since he could take out 2 more Dao fruits, he must have a lot of Dao fruits on him. "Good. 3 Dao fruits it is." Ma Yujie agreed without hesitation. Seeing Ma Yujie agree so decisively, Zhuowen suddenly felt a trace of regret. He had still misjudged the number of Dao fruits on this fatty. But since he had already agreed, it was not good to change his mind. Ma Yujie immediately took out 3 Dao fruits and handed them to Zhuowen. He urged, "Brother Zhua, hurry up and make a move. My 2 banners won't last long." Although Zhuowen was somewhat unwilling, being able to obtain 4 Dao fruits in one go was still a pleasant surprise for him. He was very clear that if he continued to force this fatty, it was very likely that this damned fatty would give up on him. Agreeing, Zhuowen took a step forward and rushed towards the eyeball. This eyeball was extremely powerful. Even Zhuowen could not help but sigh at his own inferiority. If Zhuowen were to face this eyeball alone, Zhuowen would definitely not agree to Ma Yujie's request. But now, with Ma Yujie's trump card and the help of the 5-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King, Zhuowen felt that it would not be difficult to delay this eyeball for 2 hours. In the instant that the 5-clawed golden dragon and the Devourer King were forced to retreat, Zhuowen suddenly took out the phagocytosis. At the same time, he also took out the Annihilation Meteor and 9 Extinction Divine Rune Sword. This guy really has a lot of treasures. In front of the pagoda stele, Ma Yujie also noticed Zhuowen's actions, especially after seeing the phagocytosis, 9 Extinction Divine Rune Sword, and Annihilation Meteor. He could not help but sigh in admiration. There was no need to mention the 9 Extinction Divine Rune Sword and Annihilation Meteor, and the phagocytosis's might was not inferior to these 2 secondary heaven-crushing Divine Rune Swords. In the entire 8 heavens, taking out 3 secondary heaven-crushing Divine Rune Swords at once was definitely a rare sight. From this, one could see just how wealthy Zhuowen was. Seeing Zhuowen take out 3 secondary heaven-crushing Divine Rune Swords, Ma Yujie no longer paid attention to the battle. Instead, he focused on breaking the restrictions on the pagoda stele. He was very clear that if Zhuowen took out 3 secondary heaven-crushing Divine Rune Swords, together with his 2 soul flags, they would be able to delay the frenzied eyeball for 2 hours. Therefore, he naturally had to make the best use of his time to break the restrictions on the pagoda stele. Time slowly passed by. Ma Yujie's expression was extremely focused. When he broke the last restriction on the pagoda's stele, he let out a long sigh. His eyes were filled with joy. Bang, bang, bang. At the same time, the souls of the 5-clawed golden dragon and the devouring king were finally unable to withstand the terrifying crimson flames released by the eyeball. Both of them exploded into countless streaks of golden light. As for the soul flags that carried the 2 souls, they had become dim and lifeless. It was clear that the 2 soul flags had been severely damaged. The phagocytosis, 9 Extinction Divine Rune Sword, and Annihilation Meteor that Zhuowen took out were also destroyed. Zhuowen retrieved them. Meanwhile, Zhuowen's face was pale. Seeing that the timing was not right, he immediately retreated to the pagoda stele. Ma Yujie also saw this scene. He did not dare to be negligent. He immediately activated the one-way teleportation formation in the pagoda stele. A wave of milky white light accompanied by terrifying energy fluctuations spread out. In an instant, it enveloped Zhuowen and Ma Yujie. Zhuowen only felt dizzy. Then, as if his entire body was weightless, he felt as light as a feather. Soon, the 2 of them were teleported away by the milky white light. Chapter 2272. Dispelling the confusion, the milky white light on the pagoda stele came and went quickly. In just the blink of an eye, Zhuowen and Ma Yujie had completely disappeared from the pagoda stele. The moment the 2 were teleported away, the blood-red eyeball had already arrived beside the pagoda stele, but unfortunately, it was still a step too late. Zhuowen and Ma Yujie were nowhere to be seen. The eyeball roared angrily and slammed into the pagoda stele, smashing it into dust. After venting its anger for a while, the eyeball left this place. This pagoda stele was a one-way teleportation array, so it only had one teleportation opportunity. Once this teleportation opportunity was used, the pagoda stele would be completely useless. Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. What appeared before him was an unfamiliar starry sky. He was standing on a several dozen meter large meteorite, slowly drifting through the starry sky. Not far away, Mayuja rubbed his fat belly and looked around. His brows furrowed slightly. Zhuowen knew that this fatty probably didn't know where this place was. Brother Ma, this place should not be within the scope of the great Brahma domain. Zhuowen looked at Mayuja and said slowly. Zhuowen was basically familiar with the places in the great Brahma domain, but this place gave him a very strange feeling. There was only one explanation, and that was that this place was not the great Brahma domain at all. Mayuja did not refute, but nodded and said, It seems that we have come to an unfamiliar star field. I just don't know where this place is. The pagoda stele in the secret realm was not set up by Mayuja, so he did not know where the teleportation destination was in advance, causing the two of them to be somewhat confused about where this place was. Brother Ma, what is that eyeball suppressed in the bloodstained cliff? Zhuowen looked at Mayuja seriously and asked in a deep voice. He felt that Mayuja must know something. Otherwise, how could the latter know that there was a Dao fruit under the cliff? Mayuja smiled bitterly and said, Brother Zhuowen, in fact, I don't know what's going on with the bloodstained cliff. You're wondering why I know there is a Dao fruit under the cliff, right? Zhuowen was taken aback and immediately nodded, indicating that he had agreed. Mayuja said helplessly, You don't know. When I felt the peerless killing intent on the bloodstained cliff, I guessed that the person suppressed under the cliff was probably a Dao-confirming realm expert. Wherever a Dao-confirming powerhouse stays, a Dao fruit is bound to condense. To tell you the truth, there are two types of Dao fruits. One is when the Dao fruit is formed during the moment, when the Dao-confirming expert successfully reaches the life and death extremities. The other is when the Dao-confirming expert inadvertently forms a Dao fruit while cultivating. Zhuowen's eyes lit up as he interrupted. You guessed that the person in the cliff was a Dao validation powerhouse, so you guessed that there must be a Dao fruit inside. Mayuja hurriedly nodded and said, That's right. Otherwise, why would I enter such a dangerous place? In the end, my guess was correct. There was indeed a Dao-confirming realm cultivator under the cliff. Moreover, it was a Dao-confirming realm cultivator whose corpse was dismembered. I also obtained some Dao fruits there. Zhuowen's pupils contracted. He didn't think that a Dao-confirming realm cultivator's corpse could be dismembered. Who did it? Could it be a heaven-crushing cultivator or the owner of the blood pool, the dragon tribe? Mayuja also saw the shock in Zhuowen's eyes and knew what the latter was puzzled about. He said solemnly, You don't need to ask me. In fact, I'm not very sure either. Dao-confirming realm cultivators are indeed much more powerful than Void Sky 9 Ascends, but there is still a large gap between them and heaven-crushing realm cultivators. With the power of a heaven-crushing cultivator, it's actually very easy for them to kill a Dao-confirming realm cultivator. They wouldn't be so bored as to dismember the corpse and seal it. In other words, only a Dao-confirming realm cultivator would be able to do such a thing. Zhuowen fell silent. Then he asked, Now that there's no teleportation formation in that place, does it mean that we won't be able to enter in the future? Although Zhuowen asked this, he wasn't too worried in his heart. This was because he had left a mark in that mystery realm in advance. With his current level of formation Dao, he was completely capable of following those marks to set up a one-way teleportation formation and teleport himself over. Zhuowen believed that this damned fatty's level of formation Dao was even higher than his, so he had definitely left a mark in that mystery realm as well. Mayuja put on an act and said, You're right. The one-way teleportation formation can only be used once. Since the two of us have already used it, we basically won't be able to enter. However, aside from a dragon's blood and the Dao fruit, there's actually nothing else useful in there. Moreover, we already have both of these things, so there's actually nothing left to regret. Zhuowen sneered in his mind. He didn't believe that this damned fatty really had any regrets. Moreover, he also didn't believe that there was only the Dao fruit at the bottom of that cliff. Dao-confirming powerhouses were powerhouses above the 9 steps of void sky and the 2 extremities of life and death. They were a transitional stage towards the heaven-crushing stage. Such powerhouses were extremely terrifying. Yankai didn't believe that there was only the Tao fruit left behind. Of course, Zhuowen naturally wouldn't say this out loud. He was very clear that his current strength was still insufficient. Even if he left a mark in that mystery realm, it would be useless. If he entered again, he would probably immediately be annihilated by that eyeball. Zhuowen planned to wait until his strength increased before entering again. At the very least, it would be better for him to enter that mystery realm again after his main body reached the 9 steps of void sky, or his clone reached the 3 extremities. Otherwise, he would most likely lose his life in vain. By the way, Brother Ma, may I ask how to use this Tao fruit? Zhuowen asked again. Ma Yujie glanced at Zhuowen with a strange expression as if he was looking at an idiot. Brother Zhuo, have you never heard of the Tao fruit? Ma Yujie asked. Zhuowen smiled awkwardly and didn't answer. If it weren't for Ma Yujie, he might not even know about Tao confirming, let alone the Tao fruit. Ma Yujie looked at Zhuowen's expression and knew that the latter really knew nothing about the Tao fruit. He secretly regretted it. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have directly said that he had the Tao fruit. He should have said something else. However, regret was useless now. He knew that it was impossible to take back the Tao fruit from Zhuowen, so he could only explain, Brother Zhuo, the power of the first 8 steps of the virtual sky world all comes from the starry sky law. Among them, the peak of the 8 steps of void sky is comprehending the starry sky law. There are 2 ways to advance in the 9 steps of void sky. One is to comprehend the most powerful starry sky law, the space-time law, and advance to the 9 steps of void sky. The other is to comprehend a trace of the heavenly Tao law and turn it into a trace of heavenly Tao blood and integrate it into the body. Chapter 2273. Guilin Galaxy Tao Validation is actually verifying one's own Tao, a true great Tao that belongs to oneself. Once the verification is successful, one will condense a Tao fruit that belongs to oneself. Every Tao validation powerhouse's Tao fruit is different, and its attributes and power are completely different. For example, the Tao fruit I obtained from the Tao validation powerhouse suppressed under the cliff should be a fire attribute Tao fruit. It is a 5-elemental Tao fruit, and its power is definitely much more terrifying than the fire origin. Once you have a Tao fruit, and you're still a rookie who has yet to come into contact with the heavenly Tao, you can rely on this Tao fruit to cultivate a heavenly Tao of the same attribute as it. Then, you can quickly cultivate your own Tao. Of course, there's another way. The Tao fruit can be refined into an offensive divine weapon. This kind of divine weapon's power is definitely much stronger than a sub-heaven-breaking divine weapon. However, there should be very few craftsmen in this galaxy who can refine Tao fruits. Zhuowen listened carefully. As Ma Yujie continued to explain, Zhuowen began to have a good understanding of Tao fruits. Zhuowen planned to cultivate the space-time law. This Tao fruit was not suitable for Zhuowen, and the Luoshan heavenly Tao blood he obtained from the Luoshan palace ruins was not suitable for him to comprehend his own Tao. Zhuowen planned to use the heavenly Tao blood as an offensive method, which could also be considered a trump card for him. As for the 4 Tao fruits he had, he planned to find a way to integrate them into the phagocytosis. The Devouring Seal had great potential. If he could refine all of the 9,999 restrictive spells inside, its power would far surpass that of a secondary heaven-breaking divine artifact. It should be comparable to a Tao verification divine artifact. If it was integrated with the Tao rhythm of the Tao fruit, Zhuowen believed that the power of the phagocytosis would increase by a lot. However, the problem now was that such a powerful craftsman were difficult to find. After Ma Yujie finished explaining, he fell silent. However, his gaze soon fell on the distant starry sky in front of him. There, a stream of light was rushing in their direction. Zhuowen also noticed this stream of light. His spiritual consciousness extended out and discovered that this stream of light was a huge flying ship. The appearance of this flying ship was very similar to the god Lu that Zhuowen had snatched in the far west. Zhuowen knew that this flying ship should be a large flying ship that specialized in transporting cultivators. Generally, this kind of flying ship would have a considerable force behind it. Zhuowen and Ma Yujia sent a signal to the flying ship, and the flying ship immediately stopped near the meteorite they were on. Zhuowen and Ma Yujia both had their own flying ships, and the quality and speed of their flying ships were definitely many times better than this flying ship. However, the two of them did not intend to use their own flying ships. After all, they did not even know where they were. Were they supposed to fly around like flies? They had to know where this place was, so they didn't mind following the flying ship to its destination. After the flying ship stopped, the cabin door opened. At the cabin door, a middle-aged man with a cold expression casually waved at Zhuowen and Ma Yujia. Zhuowen and Ma Yujia did not release their auras. They knew that the cultivators on the flying ship were not strong, so there was no need for them to release their auras to threaten the other party. After all, they were just passing by. They also wanted to ask the cultivators on the flying ship where they were. Zhuowen and Ida entered the cabin door, and the middle-aged man unceremoniously spread out his right hand and said, "Hand over 100 high-grade divine stones first. If you don't have high-grade divine stones, then 20,000 medium-grade divine stones is fine. If you don't have any, then I'm sorry, our flying ship doesn't welcome you." However, Zhuowen found it funny in his heart. The middle-aged man's price was quite high, but to the wealthy Zhuowen and Ma Yujia, 100 high-grade divine stone was nothing, so the two of them straightforwardly handed over the divine stone. After putting away the divine stones, the middle-aged man's attitude improved a lot. He nodded slightly at Zhuowen and Ma Yujia and said, "Come with me. Since you cut the line halfway, our flying ship doesn't have any extra rooms. I can only arrange for you to go to the warehouse." Zhuowen and Ma Yujia didn't care much. When a middle-aged man brought them into the warehouse, the two of them subconsciously frowned. This was because the warehouse's environment was too bad. It was filled with a mess of goods, and the air was filled with an unpleasant smell. Especially since the starry sky energy inside was extremely thin. At a glance, one could tell that this was the worst part of this airship. After the middle-aged man brought Zhuowen and Ma Yujia in, he didn't want to care about them anymore. So he turned around and was about to leave, but he was stopped by Zhuowen. "What can I do for you?" The middle-aged man asked Zhuowen rather rudely. Zhuowen didn't care. He took out a high-grade divine stone from his bosom, handed it to the middle-aged man, and asked with a smile, "Brother, may I know the destination of this flying ship? Can you tell me?" The middle-aged man glanced at the high-grade godstone. His body trembled, and he immediately put the high-grade godstone away. His indifferent attitude immediately became somewhat friendly. The flying ship's destination is the Gulen Galaxy. As one of the richest galaxies in the Six Desires heavenly domain, the Gulen Galaxy has everything. As long as you have enough money, you can get enough satisfaction, the middle-aged man replied. Zhuowen was startled. He didn't expect that he would come to the Six Desires heavenly domain by accident. Hearing this person mention the Gulen Galaxy, Zhuowen couldn't help but recall the starry sky chart of the 8 heavens that he had seen in the Half Moon Palace. His memory was fixed on the starry sky chart of the Six Desires heavenly domain. The Gulen Galaxy was the most prosperous and wealthy galaxy in the Six Desires heavenly domain. It was very famous in the Six Desires heavenly domain. Zhuowen also remembered that the Gulen Galaxy wasn't very far from the river of space-time quicksand. It seemed that there was a transmission array in the Gulen Galaxy to the river of space-time quicksand. Of course, regarding the river of space-time quicksand, Zhuowen wasn't big-mouthed enough to tell Ma Yujia about it. This damn fatty wasn't simple. If he told this damn fatty that he was going to the river of space-time quicksand, the fatty would inevitably become suspicious. Once he became suspicious, Zhuowen knew that it wouldn't be easy for him to get the space-time key back alone. After Zhuowen asked a few more unimportant questions, the middle-aged man took the high-grade divine stone and left the place. "I didn't expect to come to the Six Desires heavenly domain. That one-way transmission array is really amazing. It can actually cross an entire heavenly domain to another heavenly domain. This is definitely the most powerful one-way transmission array I have ever seen. The damn fatty casually found an open space and sat down. His head kept shaking. Obviously, he didn't believe that the one-way transmission array could send him so far away. Chapter 2274. Absorbing the true dragon's blood inside the damp warehouse. Zhuowen and Ma Yuji each found a place to sit cross-legged and began to cultivate. Zhuowen took out the bottle of dragon blood he had obtained from the blood-stained cliff. He had asked Ma Yuji about the usage of the true dragon's blood. It was said that the true dragon's blood could be fused with one's flesh and blood, which could greatly enhance one's physical strength. Moreover, Zhuowen had learned from Ma Yuji that the true dragon's blood in the blood-stained cliff wasn't simple. It was an expert even among the dragon clan. If one absorbed the true dragon's blood, their physical strength would be comparable to the ordinary devouring clan. Although the ordinary devouring clan wasn't as terrifying as the devouring king, they were still terrifying existences to the human clan. Ordinary giant starbeasts couldn't be compared to the real devouring clan. If Zhuowen's main body absorbed the true dragon's blood and forged such a terrifying body and spirit, it would be a great boost to his main body. Thinking of this, Zhuowen poured out a drop of true dragon's blood from the bottle and used his divine power to fuse it with his body. The moment the true dragon's blood fused with his body, he found that the blood in his body was boiling. At the same time, a series of explosive sounds burst out from his body. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He didn't expect the true dragon's blood to have such a great effect on him. It's so easy to absorb. Didn't my Yuji say that the true dragon's blood is very difficult for the human clan to absorb? How come it's so easy for me to absorb? After Zhuowen absorbed that drop of true dragon blood into his body, Zhuowen could clearly feel that his physical body had indeed strengthened quite a bit. After absorbing the true dragon's blood, Zhuowen's eyes fell on Ma Yuji, who wasn't far away. He found that this damn fatty had also begun to absorb the true dragon's blood. However, he found that this guy's process of absorbing the true dragon's blood was extremely complicated. First, he used some kind of divine flame to refine the true dragon's blood. After that, he carefully absorbed the refined true dragon's blood into his body. Moreover, when the true dragon's blood entered his body, he saw this guy grimace in pain. It was obvious that absorbing the true dragon's blood wasn't easy. However, Zhuowen had directly absorbed the drop of true dragon blood without feeling any discomfort. Instead, after absorbing the true dragon blood, his body was filled with abundant strength. Is it because I'm a Ryuka's dragon's soul? Dragon's soul? In Ryuka is dragon's blood. In some sense, Ryuka is Ryuka. Dragon's Ryuka. Ryu dragon's dragon. Ryuka is Ryuka. Dragons, Ryu, Ryu's dragon, Ryu. For example, Xiaohei was the Great Abyss Saint Dragon. However, it wasn't a real dragon, but the dragon's bloodline in its body was thicker. That was why Xiaohei's dragon soul was so powerful. The five-clawed golden dragon that Zhuowen saw on the ice tower was a real dragon. Its strength wasn't any weaker than the Devourer King. Although this was only Zhuowen's guess, he knew that Zhuowen's guess was more reliable. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain how he could absorb the true dragon's blood so easily. Thinking of this, Zhuowen looked at the true dragon's blood in the bottle. He didn't absorb the true dragon's blood drop by drop. Instead, he poured out all the true dragon's blood in the bottle and absorbed it into his body. The true dragon's blood's energy fluctuation was extremely violent. When Zhuowen poured out all the true dragon's blood in the bottle, it immediately attracted Ma Yuji's attention. Ma Yuji's eyes narrowed. He looked at Zhuowen in front of him and found that the latter had poured out all the true dragon's blood in the bottle. He was shocked and wondered if this guy was crazy. He knew better than anyone how violent the true dragon's blood was. Even if it was him, if he wanted to absorb the true dragon's blood, he would have to go through a lot of refining before he dared to absorb it. Moreover, he would only dare to absorb one drop. It was basically impossible for someone like Zhuan to pour out an entire bottle of true dragon's blood and absorb it all. Moreover, there was a possibility that he would be torn to pieces by the violent energy contained in the true dragon's blood. Just as my Yujia was about to remind him, Zhuan had already absorbed the entire bottle of true dragon's blood into his body. This guy is crazy. He's courting death. Ma Yujia muttered in a low voice. He thought that Zhuan was courting death. However, he soon discovered that not only did Zhuan not die from the true dragon's blood, but he was also rapidly absorbing the true dragon's blood. Moreover, as he absorbed the true dragon's blood, the surface of his body actually emitted traces of red light. Moreover, thunderous dragon roars erupted from his body. This guy actually absorbed the true dragon's blood so easily. Ma Yujia's mouth opened slightly as he said in extreme shock. At this moment, Zhuan's entire body was wrapped in a bloody light. His cheeks were red as if he was drunk. Zhuan could clearly feel that after the true dragon's blood entered his body, it quickly fused with the blood in his body. The fusion of the true dragon's blood flowed continuously through his 8 extraordinary meridians, nourishing his entire body and beginning to strengthen his physical body. 3 days later, Zhuan slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were bursting with excitement. He could clearly feel that his physical body had undergone a qualitative transformation under the refinement of the true dragon's blood. Ma Yujia was stunned. He stared blankly at Zhuan, who not only did not die from the true dragon's blood, but was instead full of vitality. He did not know what to say. Zhuan turned his head and smiled at the stunned Ma Yujia. He said with a smile, "Brother Ma, what's wrong?" Ma Yujia came back to his senses and smiled embarrassedly. He said, "Nothing. I'm just a little curious. Brother Zhua, you're not afraid of the true dragon's blood's corrosion at all?" Zhuan shook his head and said, "I'm not sure either. Maybe I'm just lucky." After absorbing the true dragon's blood, it didn't harm me at all. Ma Yujia's face twitched. He knew that Zhuan was not telling the truth. Although he wanted to ask how the latter did it, judging from the latter's appearance, even if he asked, he might not necessarily tell him. So he simply did not ask. Over the next few days, the two of them continued to cultivate in the warehouse, while Ma Yujia continued to refine and absorb the true dragon's blood. However, his speed was extremely slow. Chapter 2275. Shark killing fleet 10 days later. Ma Yujia finally managed to refine the 3rd drop of true dragon's blood with great difficulty. After absorbing it, the entire flying ship shook violently, as if the earth was shaking. Zhuan and Ma Yujia both opened their eyes and looked at each other. However, they didn't get up and leave the cabin. Instead, they released their divine consciousness to investigate what was happening outside the flying ship. When they entered the flying ship, they had already used their divine consciousness to investigate. They knew that the strongest person on the flying ship was only a Void Sky Stage 3 Ascension cultivator. There were only 3 Void Sky experts on the flying ship. Apart from the strongest Void Sky Stage 3 Ascension cultivator, one of the remaining 2 was a Void Sky Stage 1 Ascension cultivator, and the other was a Void Sky Stage 2 Ascension cultivator. It could be said that whether it was Zhuan or Ma Yujia, either of them only needed to lift a finger to destroy the flying ship. However, their attention wasn't on the flying ship, but on the fleet that was sweeping over from the surroundings. There were more than 10 flying ships in the fleet, and each flying ship had a large flag with a picture of shark on it. "It seems like we've encountered bandits." Ma Yujia curled his lips and said helplessly. Zhuan didn't answer. Instead, his divine consciousness noticed a beautiful woman in the most luxurious cabin of the flying ship. The reason he noticed this woman was mainly because of the 2 old men beside her. These 2 old men were Void Sky experts. One of them was the strongest Void Sky Stage 3 Ascension cultivator on the flying ship, while the other was a Void Sky Stage 2 Ascension cultivator. As for the 3rd Void Sky expert on the flying ship, he was the captain of the flying ship and was a Void Sky Stage 1 Ascension cultivator. Zhuan and Ma Yujia had already noticed this woman. After all, in such an ordinary flying ship, there were actually two Void Sky experts as bodyguards. Obviously, this woman's identity wasn't simple. They might not be bandits. Perhaps their target is that woman? Zhuowen said with a faint smile. Ma Yujie raised his eyebrows and said, "That's also possible." At this moment, the flying ship's captain, Hua Yongjun, trembled. He stopped the flying ship and looked at the surrounding flying ships in the control room. His face instantly turned pale. Shark-killing fleet? How did we encounter such a fleet? It's over. Hua Yongjun trembled all over. The murderous shark fleet was a well-known killer force in the Six Desires Heavenly Realm. Although it could not be compared with the real first-class forces in the Six Desires Heavenly Realm, it was definitely one of the best among the second-class forces. Their small fleet was simply a dead end in front of the shark-killing fleet. At this moment, a thin man walked down from the leading airship of the shark-slaughtering fleet. He looked at the airship surrounded by the fleet with his hands behind his back and said indifferently, "Everyone in the airship come down. Otherwise, I'll destroy your airship immediately." As soon as the skinny man said this, the enclosed cabin of the flying ship was immediately opened. Then, a group of people walked out from inside. Captain Hua Yongjun walked in front with a flattering smile. He nodded and bowed to the skinny man and said, "Sir, if you have any orders, just say it. I'll definitely do it for you if I can." The skinny man glanced sideways at Hua Yongjun, grabbed the void with his right hand, and lifted Hua Yongjun in his hand. The people who came down from the cabin all trembled in fear when they saw the captain being lifted so easily by the skinny man. The beautiful woman, who was mixed in the crowd, frowned slightly. She knew very well that the shark-slaughtering fleet stopped the airship for her. "Miss, this old servant will help you block this man. When the time comes, run away immediately," the old man said softly to the woman. "Old Chun, this man is Ji Sha, the captain of the shark-slaughtering fleet. His cultivation base is much higher than yours. You can't stop him." The beautiful woman shook her head. Old Chun, who was unafraid of death, said, "Miss, this old servant will help you escape even if it costs me my life." The beautiful woman sighed softly, but remained silent. She knew that the two old men beside her would probably die here today, and there was a high chance that she would also fall. The skinny man lifted the captain and didn't even say a word. His right hand suddenly exerted force, and a surge of divine power invaded the captain's body and completely annihilated him. "Miss Chow, this king really didn't expect you to hide in this small airship. Isn't it a bit beneath your noble status to take such an ordinary airship? Why don't you come to our shark-slaughtering fleet? This king promises to make you comfortable." The skinny man's gloomy eyes fell on the crowd. At the same time, a terrifying divine sense swept over and began to scan the trembling crowd. The beautiful woman hiding in the crowd sighed softly. With a wave of her lily-white hand, an azure brilliance burst out and condensed into a huge azure lawn. The beautiful woman leaped onto the azure lawn, turned into an azure light, and disappeared from the spot at an extremely fast speed. The skinny man snorted coldly and grabbed with his right hand. A terrifying divine power condensed into a huge hand that covered the sky and mercilessly grabbed at the azure lawn. Unfortunately, when the skinny man made his move, the two old men beside the beautiful woman rushed out at the same time. The two of them immediately summoned the illusory heavenly bridge and then detonated it. The terrifying explosive energy instantly caused the scrawny man's terrifying hand to collapse. Then, the terrifying explosive energy swept the scrawny man like a hurricane. The skinny man frowned. With a flick of his finger, he took out a jade-colored divine sword from his spirit ring. This divine sword instantly slashed out countless sword shadows, and the terrifying explosive energy was blasted into countless pieces by these countless sword shadows. However, the skinny man's movements were slightly stagnant because of the explosive energy, and he completely lost the opportunity to grab the azure lawn. "Kill everyone here. I'll go after that woman." After the skinny man gave some instructions, he leaped out and chased after the azure lawn. As soon as the skinny man left, more than a dozen airships of the shark-slaughtering fleet launched the cannons on the airships one after another. In an instant, colorful energy cannons burst out. The cultivators who were surrounded all showed a look of fear. The energy cannons of more than a dozen airships fired at the same time. The energy that erupted was extremely terrifying. These cultivators couldn't block it at all. As for escaping, it was impossible. The shark-slaughtering fleet had already set up a terrifying trap and kill array around them when they surrounded them. There was no way for them to escape. However, when these energy cannons were about to hit everyone, a bloody light swept out. Then, these terrifying energy cannons were all blocked by this bloody light and then collapsed into nothingness. After the energy cannons were blocked by the bloody light, this bloody light swept out like a long rainbow and instantly blasted through more than a dozen airships in the surroundings. Then, the dozen or so flying ships all exploded into powder. Everyone who had just walked through the gates of hell was shocked when they saw this scene. Only now did they see that this bloody light was actually a divine sword with a body as bright as blood. After this bloody sword exploded more than a dozen airships in an instant, it rushed to the side of a white-clothed young man among the crowd. Chapter 2276. A chance encounter the moment the blood sword appeared in front of the white-robed young man. How could the surrounding people not know that the white-robed young man was the one who had just destroyed more than a dozen airships and saved them? "Thank you for saving us, Senior." One of the clever cultivators quickly came out and cupped his fist to Zhuowen to thank him. Only then did the rest react and follow this person to thank Zhuowen. Zhuowen just nodded in response. He was standing in the crowd, and since the shark-slaughtering fleet intended to kill them, Zhuowen naturally could not sit back and do nothing. On the other hand, Zhuowen looked at the woman surnamed Chao, who had just escaped, in a new light. The blue wand released by the woman surnamed Chao was extremely fast, almost as fast as a Void Sky 7-step cultivator. The thin man, the captain of the shark-slaughtering fleet, was only a Void Sky 5th-step cultivator. In Zhuowen's opinion, it would be difficult for him to catch up with a woman surnamed Chao. That little girl is a little interesting. That blue wand is not a kind of starry sky beast, but a kind of powerful energy. It should have been left to her by the elders of her family for her to escape. Ma Yujie clicked his tongue in wonder. Zhuowen did not answer. Instead, he looked for a cultivator beside him and asked for a map to the old Orchid Star River. After that, he turned to Ma Yujie and said, "Brother Ma, you and I are not familiar with the Six Desires heavenly domain, and our cooperation ended after we left that blood-stained cliff. This Zhuo will take his leave now." After saying that, Zhuowen did not give Ma Yujie any chance to speak. With a wave of his sleeve, he flew away with the blood immortal sword. Ma Yujie had his hands behind his back as he silently looked at Zhuowen's departing figure, and he shook his head slightly as he muttered to himself, "This fellow left in such a hurry. Could it be that there's something shameful? If there is, then it will be interesting. I will also go to the Gulen Galaxy to take a look." Saying so, Ma Yujie casually grabbed a cultivator who was about to leave this place and threatened him. The cultivator obediently handed over the route map to the old Orchid Star River. Ma Yujie casually tossed the cultivator aside and used his divine sense to check the route map of the Gulen Star River. Then, with a stomp of his right foot, he left this place. Zhuowen sat cross-legged in the airship, holding the phagocytosis in his right hand and the small temple in his left. He used the faith power of the small temple to refine the phagocytosis in his right hand. During this time, Zhuowen had been diligently refining the phagocytosis in his hand. When he was in the bone realm, he had already refined the 1,000 restrictions in the phagocytosis. However, from the time he came out of the starry sky until now, he had only refined 1,000 seals, which added up to a total of 2,000 seals. It could be said that Zhuowen's speed of refining the last 1,000 restrictions was obviously much slower than before. From this, it could be seen that the restrictions in the phagocytosis were getting more and more powerful. The time that Zhuowen needed to refine them was much more terrifying than before. Thinking that there were a total of 9,999 restrictions in the phagocytosis, Zhuowen knew that it would take him a very long time to completely refine all of them. Of course, the power of the phagocytosis was constantly increasing. Now, the phagocytosis was much more useful to him than the 9 Extinction Divine Rune Sword and the Apocalyptic Meteor. He knew that as long as he worked tirelessly, all the restrictions in the phagocytosis would eventually be conquered by him. Kid, there is a battle ahead. Do you want to go around it? Xiao He, who was controlling the airship in the control cabin, suddenly said. Now, Zhuowen basically handed over the control of the airship to Xiao He and the Blood Immortal. He treated it as a hands-off boss and crazily cultivated or refined the phagocytosis. Ever since the incident with Mu Qinxue in the Disaster Canyon, Zhuowen felt that his strength was not enough. Although his current strength had actually surpassed most of the cultivators, it was still not worth mentioning in front of the powerhouses in the Void Sky 9 steps. Therefore, Zhuowen wanted to increase his strength as soon as possible. Zhuowen casually swept out with his divine sense and found that the people fighting were 2 men and a woman. Zhuowen was familiar with the man and woman among the 3 people. One of the men was the thin man from the shark killing fleet, and the woman was the woman surnamed Chao. Zhuowen had never seen the other man before. This man was not young, about 35 years old. His body was quite strong, and his skin was wheat-colored. From the traces of the battle, Zhuowen could tell at a glance that these 2 men were in cahoots. Zhuowen silently watched the battle. The strong man did not make a move, but stood on the side with his arms crossed. The thin man attacked the woman, surnamed Chao, like a storm. Although the woman, surnamed Chao's cultivation was far from being a match for the thin man, the Qing Wan circled around her and blocked the thin man's attacks for her. Zhuowen's gaze fell on the strong man. The thin man's cultivation was not high, only at the 5th step of the Void Sky 9 steps. However, the strong man's strength was even higher, reaching the peak of the 6th step of the Void Sky 9 steps. With the speed of the woman, surnamed Chao's Qing Wan, the thin man could never catch up. However, the thin man had caught up to her. Clearly, it was because of the strong man. Although the Qing Wan speed was comparable to an ordinary cultivator at the 7th step of the Void Sky 9 steps, while the strong man was only at the peak of the 6th step of the Void Sky 9 steps, Zhuowen knew that the strong man should have a special trump card. Senior brother, can you help this little girl? As long as senior brother helps me, this little girl will repay you generously. The moment Zhuowen's airship appeared, it attracted the attention of the 3 people. The thin man did not even look at the airship, but the strong man narrowed his eyes, and his spiritual sense suddenly turned into a big hand, annihilating the spiritual sense derived from Zhuowen's probing. The woman surnamed Chao, on the other hand, seemed to be desperate and sent a voice transmission to Zhuowen. Zhuowen withdrew his spiritual sense and stopped the airship. He walked down from the airship and looked at the strong man with a rather unfriendly gaze. The spiritual sense derived from Zhuowen's spiritual sense was only used to probe, so it did not have any offensive power. It was a polite inquiry between cultivators. However, the strong man had forcibly annihilated his spiritual sense. This meant that he did not put him in his eyes at all. After Zhuowen walked out of the airship, the strong man sized up Zhuowen and frowned slightly. He was clearly a little surprised that the young man in white in front of him was also a cultivator at the 6th step of the Void Sky 9 steps. Of course, although Zhuowen's aura was also at the 6th step of the Void Sky 9 steps, there was still some distance between him and the peak of the 6th step of the Void Sky 9 steps. Although the strong man was a little apprehensive, he did not care too much. Friend, our shark slaughtering fleet is handling matters here. You better not poke your nose into other people's business. Otherwise, you will get into trouble. The strong man still had his hands behind his back and looked at Zhuowen with disdain. Chapter 2277. Chao Ziyuan, Senior brother, save me. The worry in the woman's eyes grew even denser, and she couldn't help but transmit her voice to Juon again. It was this moment of distraction that allowed the thin man to seize the opportunity and shatter the Azure Phoenix with a single punch before grabbing the woman with his right hand. Haha, Lord Zhou Run, it's all thanks to you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to capture this bitch. The thin man laughed heartily as he carried the ashen-faced woman over to the strong man's side. Even though the thin man had noticed Zhuoan, he didn't pay much attention to him. Even though the young man in white was at the sixth step of the Void Sky realm as well, he knew that the young man in white was still slightly inferior to the strong man by his side. Moreover, it was 2 against 1, so the thin man didn't think that the young man in white would try anything funny. The strong man smiled, and then he looked indifferently at Zhuoan and said, "You'd better scram. Otherwise, don't blame me for making a move." The thin man gazed at Zhuoan with disdain and said, "You're just a trash coward. Scram." The woman had a wooden expression on her face. At this moment, she didn't ask for help anymore. She knew that she had been captured by the thin man, so it would be useless no matter how she begged for help. The young man in white was no match for the 2 of them. "Do you dare to repeat what you said just now?" Zhuoan's expression was calm as he gazed at the thin man in silence. It was like he was looking at a dead man. The thin man still gazed at Zhuoan with disdain and said slowly, "What? Are you still unconvinced? I'm being too kind by calling you a trash coward. As far as I'm concerned, you're worse than a coward." Zhuoan didn't say anything. He just raised his right hand, and surging divine energy formed a terrifying hurricane that swept towards the thin man. The thin man clearly hadn't expected Zhuoan to suddenly attack, so he couldn't react for a moment. On the other hand, the strong man by his side reacted extremely quickly. He roared furiously and blasted out a hand made of divine energy as well. Bang! Suddenly, the divine power hurricane and the divine power hand collided. Then, the divine power hand collapsed in the blink of an eye, and the divine power hurricane engulfed the skinny man. A miserable scream rang out as the thin man's body dissipated bit by bit in the divine power hurricane. In the end, not even his bones were left. He was completely dead. Furthermore, Zhuoan had controlled his strength perfectly. He did not harm the Chow woman in the slightest. At this moment, the strong man's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He could only watch as the thin man was killed in front of him, and he was powerless to do anything. The muscular man was no fool. From the way Zhuoan had killed the skinny man in an instant, he could tell that the strength of the white-clothed youth in front of him was much more terrifying than his own. Thinking of this, the strong man did not hesitate and immediately crushed the talisman in his hand. His whole body turned into a black light and instantly disappeared. Zhuoan narrowed his eyes. This strong man's speed was not slow. No wonder he could intercept the Chow woman. He must have relied on the escape talisman in his hand to achieve this. However, not long after the strong man left, a bloody light swept out from the darkness of the starry sky. The moment the strong man passed by the bloody light, he was caught off guard and was immediately pierced between his eyebrows by the bloody light. He fell to the ground dead. The battle ended too quickly. Before the Chow woman could even react, the thin man and the strong man had already fallen to the ground dead. When the Chow woman's gaze finally fell on Zhuoan, she immediately felt deep respect for him. She cupped her hands towards Zhuoan and thanked him. "Many thanks for Senior's help. My name is Chow Ziyuan. I am a direct descendant of the Chow family in the old Orchid Star River." Zhuoan nodded and didn't say anything else. He was unfamiliar with this place and didn't have any concept of the Chow clan that Chow Ziyuan spoke of. The space-time quicksand river is not far from the old Orchid Star River. Do you have a specific introduction jade strip to the space-time quicksand river? Zhuoan asked lightly. The reason why Zhuoan saved this woman was because of his character and also because he wanted to ask about the space-time quicksand river. Since this woman could be chased by the so-called killing shark fleet, her background should not be small. She should know a lot about the space-time quicksand river. Chow Tuan looked at Zhuoan in surprise and asked, "Senior, are you planning to enter the space-time quicksand river?" "Yes. Zhuowen did not hide anything. Senior, the space-time quicksand river is not a place you can enter at any time. The space-time quicksand river is now under the control of the quicksand family. The quicksand family has a very strict control over the number of cultivators who can enter the space-time quicksand river. Only cultivators approved by them can enter the space-time quicksand river for experience, Chao Ziyuan said. Approval? What kind of approval is needed? Zhuowen frowned slightly. He did not expect that the space-time quicksand river was controlled by the so-called quicksand family. Moreover, one needed to be approved to enter, which made Zhuowen feel somewhat helpless. Is the quicksand family also in the space-time quicksand river? I remember that the space-time quicksand river is an ownerless object. Why is it controlled by the quicksand family? Zhuowen asked in surprise. Chao Ziyuan said cautiously, Senior may not know, but 1,000 years ago, anyone could enter the space-time quicksand river. However, 1,000 years ago, the space-time quicksand river began to collapse for some unknown reason. Although the speed of collapse was not fast, this collapse flooded the entrance to the space-time quicksand river. In other words, the entrance to the space-time quicksand river collapsed and disappeared. If other cultivators want to enter the space-time quicksand river, they must have an entrance. Otherwise, they can't enter at all. The quicksand family has mastered the only way to enter the space-time quicksand river. Therefore, the space-time quicksand river is now under the control of the quicksand family. The quicksand family is not in the space-time quicksand river, but in the Guilin celestial river. Moreover, they're the most powerful force in the Guilin celestial river. As for the space-time quicksand river, due to the influence of the space-time quicksand river, the entire space-time is dislocated. Therefore, it is not suitable for living there. Hearing Chao Ziyuan's words, Zhuowen nodded. Although he did not know much about the space-time quicksand river, he knew that since the entrance to the space-time quicksand river collapsed 1,000 years ago, he could only rely on the quicksand family to enter the space-time quicksand river. Senior, if you really want to go to the space-time quicksand river, you must go to the quicksand family. Why don't you come with me to the Guilin celestial river first? When the time comes, I can take you to the quicksand family. Chao Ziyuan said cautiously. Zhuowen glanced at Chao Ziyuan and nodded without hesitation. Then, I will have to trouble you, Miss Chao. Chapter 2278. Xiong Yuan, the Guilin Galaxy, was located in the east of the Six Desires Heavenly Domain. It was the largest galaxy in the east of the Six Desires Heavenly Domain. Even the entire Heavenly Domain, the Guilin Galaxy, was considered one of the top. Along the way, Zhuowen heard a lot about the Guilin Galaxy and the Six Desires Heavenly Domain from Chao Ziyuan. Zhuowen learned from Chao Ziyuan that the Six Desires Heavenly Domain had at least 3 Void Sky 9-step cultivators, and this was only on the surface. As for how many Void Sky 9 steps cultivators there were, Chao Ziyuan was not sure. It was only now that Zhuowen realized that the overall strength of the Six Desires Heavenly Domain was many times stronger than that of the Great Brahma Domain. It should be known that the Great Brahma Domain only had one elite that had reached the Void Sky 9 steps, while the Six Desires Heavenly Domain had at least 3. Of course, Zhuowen also guessed that there were at least 3 Void Sky 9-step experts in the Hua Xia Heavenly Domain. They were the Supreme Pure One, the Supreme Pure One, and the Jade Pure One. These 3 Pure Ones were the mainstays of the Hua Xia Heavenly Domain. Zhuowen knew that the 3 of them must be Void Sky 9th step experts. At the same time, Zhuowen also inquired about the Quicksand family. He discovered that the Quicksand family's strongest expert, Quang Li, was a half-step Void Sky 9th step expert. At the same time, Quang Li controlled the method to enter the river of space-time quicksand. The so-called recognition was actually the recognition of the Quicksand family's strongest expert, Quang Li. As long as Quang Li allowed someone to enter the river of space-time quicksand, that person would naturally be qualified to enter the river of space-time quicksand. Quang Li had the sole right to decide. Back then, besides the Guilin Galaxy, Zhuowen also asked about the Six Desires Palace. However, the Six Desires Palace was more mysterious than Zhuowen had imagined. Chao Ziyuan didn't know much about the Six Desires Palace. As for Moyan Wushang, who had joined the Six Desires Palace, he naturally didn't get any clues. Zhuan had promised Moyan Wushang that he would definitely go to the Six Desires Palace to find her in the future. Now that Zhuan had been inexplicably transferred to the Six Desires Heavenly Domain, he naturally had to make a trip to the Six Desires Palace. However, before going to the Six Desires Palace, Zhuan planned to go to the river of space-time quicksand to find the second key. He was really afraid that Ma Yujia, that fatty, would beat him to it. Although Ma Yujia didn't know that the second space-time key was in the river of space-time quicksand, the fatty was very smart. He would definitely go to the river of space-time quicksand to try his luck. This guy's array Dao level was too terrifying. He might really be able to find the space-time divine key in the river of time and space quicksand. Therefore, it was better for Zhuan to deal with this matter as soon as possible. Another 5 days later, Zhuan's airship arrived at the Gulin Celestial River. The flying ship stopped at the plaza designated by Chao Ziyuan in advance. When the two of them walked down from the flying ship, a group of cultivators dressed in the same uniform immediately walked over and knelt on one knee in front of Chao Ziyuan. This subordinate respectfully welcomes young Mississippi. Young Miss must have been frightened on the way. In front of the group, an old man with long hair knelt on one knee in front of Chao Ziyuan. Chao Ziyuan looked at the long-haired old man in front of her. Her jade-like nose unconsciously wrinkled as she said, "Xiong Yuan, why are you here? Where's my father?" The long-haired old man still knelt on one knee and said indifferently, "Second master went out to take care of some matters. He hasn't returned yet." Chao Ziyuan frowned deeply and said in a deep voice, "Where did he go?" The long-haired old man replied, "This subordinate doesn't know. Second master didn't say where he was going before he left. How about this? Young miss, follow this old servant back first. The patriarch and the others miss you very much." Zhuan stood to the side and silently looked at the long-haired old man. Although the old man's behavior was not inappropriate, his tone was somewhat stiff and cold. He wasn't particularly obedient to Chao Ziyuan. Zhuan didn't know much about the Chao family's matters. However, Chao Ziyuan had told him that the Chao family's patriarch was her uncle and her father's elder brother. It was said that Chao Ziyuan's uncle didn't inherit the position of patriarch from Chao Ziyuan's grandfather. Instead, it was Chao Ziyuan's father who gave the position to her uncle. When Chao Ziyuan's father was young, he was very talented and was highly regarded by Chao Ziyuan's grandfather. Before her grandfather passed away, he passed the position of patriarch to Chao Ziyuan's father in advance. However, her father didn't want the position of patriarch. Later on, for unknown reasons, her father was ambushed and his foundation was destroyed. Although his cultivation didn't drop, he didn't make any progress and was later surpassed by her uncle. Chao Ziyuan's father was a person with strong self-esteem. When he saw that his cultivation wasn't as good as her uncle's, he decisively gave the position of patriarch to her uncle. However, after her uncle took over the position of the head of the household, his attitude towards them immediately became cold, and he even deliberately alienated them from his faction. After all, Chao Ziyuan's experience was less than Zhuan's. However, Zhuan's heart was as clear as a mirror. The murderous shark fleet was an organization of assassins. Since the murderous shark fleet had found Chao Ziyuan, there must be someone who wanted to kill her. Who exactly wanted to kill Chao Ziyuan? Zhuan felt that Chao Ziyuan's uncle was more suspicious. After all, Chao Ziyuan's grandfather had passed the position of patriarch to Chao Ziyuan's father. Therefore, Chao Ziyuan's uncle held a grudge against Chao Ziyuan's father. Although Chao Ziyuan's father had passed the position of patriarch to Chao Ziyuan's uncle, it could be seen from her uncle's various actions that he wasn't a magnanimous person. Therefore, Chao Ziyuan's uncle was the most likely person to make a move on Chao Ziyuan. Of course, these were all Zhuan's guesses. He didn't have any evidence, so it was hard to judge. Chao Ziyuan saw that the long-haired old man had said everything and didn't say anything else. She turned around and was about to introduce Zhuowen when the long-haired old man interrupted her. "Young miss, I know this person. Previously, you mentioned this person in the message. You can go back first. This old servant will make appropriate arrangements for this person. After all, he saved your life," the long-haired old man said indifferently. Chao Ziyuan's charming face flushed red. This long-haired old man was really too arrogant. He actually dared to speak to her like this. Just as Chao Ziyuan was about to flare up, Zhuowen extended his hand and stopped her. "Miss Ziyuan, you can go back first. When the time comes, we'll meet at the Chao family," Zhuowen said with a smile. Chao Ziyuan glanced at Zhuowen with some astonishment. Although she felt that there was something wrong with this long-haired old man, she couldn't tell what exactly was wrong. Moreover, since Zhuowen had spoken, she couldn't say anything else. "Xiong Yuan, Big Brother Zhua is my esteemed guest. You'd better make proper arrangements. Otherwise, this young miss will hold you accountable." Chao Ziyuan's beautiful eyes coldly glanced at the long-haired old man. Then, she bid farewell to Zhuowen and left under the lead of 2 guards. It was obvious that she was going to meet the patriarch of the Chao family. After Chao Ziyuan left, the long-haired old man, Xiong Yuan, stood up. His gaze was somewhat indifferent as he glanced at Zhuowen and said, "Friend, thank you for saving my family's young miss. Now follow me. In order to express our Chao family's gratitude, I have something to give you as a reward for this kindness." As he spoke, Xiong Yuan walked forward without looking back. Zhuowen frowned as he looked at the arrogant, long-haired old man. However, he quickly smiled and followed. Chapter 2279. Prison. After the long-haired old man brought Zhuowen to a remote dead end, he turned to Zhuowen and said indifferently, "Your strength is not bad. It's rare for a rogue cultivator to reach Void Sky 6th step. Now, I'll give you a chance that others can't even dream of. Join our Chao family and pledge your loyalty to our Chao family." After saying that, the long-haired old man put his hands behind his back and revealed an arrogant expression. It was as if his words were the biggest charity to Zhuowen. Zhuowen looked at the long-haired old man in front of him with a funny expression. This old man was only at the early stage of Void Sky 7th step. In front of Zhuowen, he was nothing. Yet, he dared to boast so shamelessly in front of Zhuowen. Of course, if it was an ordinary Void Sky 6th steps cultivator, they might really be afraid in front of this long-haired old man. In addition, this old man was backed by the powerful Chao family of the old Orchid Galaxy. However, Zhuowen wouldn't. Not to mention that the Chao family couldn't compare to the Quicksand family. Even if it was the Quicksand family, Zhuowen wouldn't be afraid. Now, Zhuowen's strength was enough to instantly kill any Void Sky 8th step cultivator. He was close to a half-step Void Sky 9th step cultivator. The strongest person in the Quicksand family was a half-step Void Sky 9th step cultivator. Zhuowen might not be afraid of the Quicksand family, so why would he be afraid of this Chao family? What? Hurry up and give me an answer. Otherwise, you know the consequences. Our Chao family is powerful enough to rank in the top 5 in the ancient Orchid Star River. You'd better be sensible. The long-haired old man saw that Zhuowen had fallen silent and frowned. He immediately released the pressure in his body, preparing to use it to intimidate Zhuowen. Zhuowen stood boldly, unaffected by the long-haired old man. He said indifferently, "Scram, your Chao family isn't qualified for me to serve." The long-haired old man didn't look surprised. His goal wasn't to make Zhuowen join the Chao family, but to give him a reason to kill. Since Zhuowen had rejected him, the long-haired old man naturally had no scruples. "Then I'm really sorry. No one can refuse the Chao family's invitation and leave alive." As the long-haired old man spoke, he slowly pulled out the divine sword from his waist. However, when he was halfway through pulling it out, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. His right hand had lost all feeling. When his gaze landed on his right hand had been sliced off by a blood sword at some point in time. The half-unsheathed divine sword had also fallen to the ground. The long-haired old man was stunned. He didn't even notice when the blood sword appeared beside him or when it cut off his right arm. He didn't notice any of this at all. The long-haired elder wasn't stupid. He knew that the reason for this was because the blood sword was too terrifying, much more powerful than him. You're wrong. I rejected your Chao clan's invitation, but I will still leave here alive. Zhuan spoke this time. The long-haired old man stiffly turned his head and looked at the white-clothed young man, slowly walking over. The fear in his eyes grew heavier and heavier. The long-haired old man wanted to call out, but he found that he couldn't make a sound. Then he lost his last bit of consciousness. Zhuan silently looked at the long-haired old man who had been beheaded by the blood sword. If the long-haired old man had spoken nicely to him, Zhuan wouldn't have killed him. Unfortunately, the long-haired old man didn't know his limits. Not only did he not give Zhuan any rewards, he even wanted to kill him. Since that was the case, Zhuan naturally wouldn't let anyone bully him. He used a thunderous method to kill the long-haired old man. The battle on Zhuan's side had happened too quickly. It had already ended before the shockwaves of the battle could even spread. After all, the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. After putting away the long-haired old man's spirit ring, Zhuan walked towards the Chao family. Although he wasn't very clear about the internal conflicts of the Chao family, he knew that Chao Ziyuan's return to the Chao family boded ill rather than well. Moreover, Chao Ziyuan was the only person he knew in the old Orchid Galaxy. Naturally, Zhuan couldn't just stand by and watch her die. Moreover, Zhuan hadn't asked Chao Ziyuan about the details of the Quicksand family. No matter what, Zhuan would definitely help Chao Ziyuan. In the Chao family's hall, the patriarch Chao Xianbing was sitting at the head of the table. The upper echelons of the Chao family were sitting on both sides of the hall. However, the atmosphere in the hall was very solemn and tense. The upper echelons on both sides of the hall didn't dare to make a sound. They were carefully looking at Chao Xianbing, who was sitting at the head of the table. Chao Ziyuan was led by 2 guards to the front of the hall. She raised her pretty face and stared at Chao Xianbing with her clear eyes. She didn't say anything. Chao Xianbing also looked at Chao Ziyuan silently. However, this silence didn't last long. Chao Xianbing opened his mouth. Ziyuan, Uncle wants to tell you a piece of unfortunate news. Chao Xianbing said indifferently. Chao Ziyuan's beautiful eyes narrowed as an ominous feeling arose in her heart. However, she didn't say anything. Instead, she stared at Chao Xianbing, waiting for him to continue. Your father betrayed our Chao family. Therefore, according to the family's rules, I sent him to the Blackwater prison. You probably didn't know about this, right? Chao Xianbing continued. Chao Ziyuan's delicate body trembled. She automatically ignored the fact that her father had betrayed the family. The only thing in her mind was the Blackwater prison. The Blackwater prison was the most terrifying dungeon of the Chao family. Before a prisoner was sent to the Blackwater prison, their body would be cut into thousands of pieces. After their body was drenched in blood, they would be tied up in the Blackwater prison. However, this wasn't the most important thing. The most terrifying thing was the Blackwater prison. This was because the Blackwater prison's Blackwater prison was filled with countless black insects. These black insects were only the size of a fingernail. However, they loved to drill into a person's wounds and enter the person's internal organs through the wounds. These insects weren't fatal. Their only use was to stimulate all the nerves in the person's body, causing the person's pain to be magnified by thousands of times. It made the prisoner feel as if he was better off dead. In the past, the Blackwater prison was used to imprison the Chao family's mortal enemies. Moreover, most of the prisoners couldn't withstand the pain in the Blackwater prison and chose to commit suicide. Chao Ziyuan couldn't hold back her tears as she hysterically shouted at Chao Xianbing. Chao Xianbing, you've gone too far. The Blackwater prison only imprisons the Chao family's mortal enemies. My father is a direct descendant of the Chao family. How can you treat him like this? Chao Xuanbing's face darkened. He didn't expect Chao Ziyuan to be so bold as to call him by his name in front of everyone. She didn't put him in her eyes at all. Your father colluded with the Chao family's mortal enemy, the Bakufu. Fortunately, I discovered it in time. Otherwise, our Chow family would be in danger. I'm already being merciful by not killing a scum like your father. And you, how dare you call me by my name? You must know about your father's betrayal, but you didn't report it. I'm afraid you're an accomplice. Men, capture this unfilial son and imprison him in the Blackwater prison as well. Chapter 2280. Indenture Contract Kong. Chow Ziyuan naturally wouldn't sit still and wait for death. With a wave of her jade-like hand, blue energy condensed into a blue wand and blasted away the two guards who were about to take her down. Chow Xianbing, who was walking at the head of the group, coldly snorted as he stretched out his right hand toward Chow Ziyuan. The moment the blue wand in front of Chow Ziyuan came into contact with Chow Xuanbing's hand, it immediately dissipated into countless blue lights. Chow Ziyuan even spat out a mouthful of blood. Her expression was dim, and she looked dispirited. Take her away and imprison her in the Blackwater prison. Chow Xuanbing's eyes were cold as he looked at the guards who had just been blasted away by Chow Ziyuan. The two guards were submissive. They hurriedly nodded their heads and said yes. Then they grabbed the weak and heavily injured Chow Ziyuan and took her away. The hall was as silent as cicadas in winter. No one came out to speak. It was terrifyingly quiet. Chow Feng and his daughter Chow Ziyuan are suspected of colluding with the shogunate, so this patriarch will imprison them both in the Blackwater prison. I believe no one has any objections, right? Chow Xianbing looked around and said coldly, Patriarch's approach is correct. This kind of traitor must not be tolerated and should be severely punished. Yes, Chow Feng's character is terrible. I think the Blackwater prison's punishment for him is too light. There was a burst of agreement in the hall. Chow Xianbing sat at the head of the table. His eyes narrowed as the corners of his mouth curled into a smile. Outside the Chow family's gate, Zhuowen stood in front of it and looked at the magnificent mansion in front of him, clicking his tongue in amazement. The Chow family's mansion could definitely be regarded as magnificent, not the slightest bit inferior to the great Brahma Starfield sects like the Dark Fantasy sect and High Heaven sect. When Zhuowen intended to use his divine sense to explore the mansion, he found that his divine sense was blocked. Fortunately, Zhuowen's divine sense was powerful enough to not disturb the Chow family's barrier. Of course, with Zhuowen's current powerful divine sense, he could completely break the Chow family's barrier by force, but Zhuowen did not come here to cause trouble. At least, he had to do a good job on the surface. Who are you? Outside the door, the two guards looked at Zhuo when walking over with fear. Their expressions were reverent. They weren't hotheads, so they could naturally feel the aura on Zhuowen's body. They knew that this white-clothed youth before them was absolutely not an ordinary person. I am Miss Chow Ziyuan's friend. Today, she has invited me to enter the Chow clan. Could I trouble you to inform her? Zhuowen said casually. When the two guards heard this, a strange look appeared in their eyes, but they quickly regained their composure. Please wait a moment. I will inform the patriarch immediately, one of the guards politely said before entering the mansion. Zhuowen's eyes flashed. The strange look in the eyes of the two guards did not escape Zhuowen's eyes, but Zhuowen did not care. After all, Chow Ziyuan was a direct descendant of the Chow family, and her status in the Chow family was not low. Zhuowen knew that nothing would happen to Chow Ziyuan in a short period of time. It was just that Zhuowen despised the Chow family's actions. From Xiong Yuan's actions, it could be seen that the patriarch of the Chow family was not a good person. Not long after, the guard came out. Behind the guard was a middle-aged man with a solemn face. Are you Ziyuan's friend? The middle-aged man glanced at Zhuowen and slowly asked. Zhuowen frowned. He did not like the middle-aged man's attitude. It was as if someone owed him money. Yes, where is Ziyuan? Why didn't she come out? Zhuowen asked indifferently. The middle-aged man glanced at Zhuowen and said with a smile, I didn't expect that Ziyuan would get to know a young and promising friend like you outside. Ziyuan is really lucky. Ziyuan has some matters to attend to right now, so it's not convenient for her to come out. Come in with me. I'll bring you to see her. All right, I forgot to introduce myself. I am Ziyuan's third uncle, Chow Yuanji. I wonder how you and Ziyuan met? What sector are you from? The middle-aged man started introducing himself as he led the way. Zhuan nodded and said, I'm Zhuan, and I got to know Ms. Ziyuan by accident on the way. As for me, I'm only an independent cultivator, and I don't belong to any sect. When Chao Yunji heard that Zhuan was just a rogue cultivator with no sect, his eyes narrowed slightly as he heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. When Chao Yunji saw that this young man's cultivation had reached the sixth step of the Void Sky Realm, he thought that this young man was a disciple of some powerful force. Now that he knew that this young man was just a rogue cultivator, Chao Yunji naturally felt a lot more at ease. Chao Yunji led Zhuan into a rather grand pavilion. He pointed at the empty hall and said, Brother Zhua, sit in the hall for a while. I'll help you call Ziyuan. Zhuan sneered in his heart. He didn't say anything, but nodded and entered the pavilion. Chao Yunji looked at Zhuan's back as a sinister smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Then he left the place. Sitting in a rather dark and gloomy hall, Zhuan took out 9 beast bone array discs from his spirit ring. Soon after, he formed a seal with both hands. Immediately, the 9 beast bone array discs emitted a dark black light from their surface before they entered the hall in 9 different directions. After doing all this, Zhuan leisurely sat on his seat, as if he was really waiting for Chao Ziyuan. An hour later, Chao Yunji came to the pavilion once again. Chao Ziyuan brought a middle-aged man with her. This middle-aged man looked quite similar to Chao Yunji. He was even older than Chao Yunji. Whether it was his temperament or strength, he was much stronger than Chao Yunji. Chao Yunji followed beside this middle-aged man with a respectful and reverent expression. Obviously, this middle-aged man's status in the Chao family was not low. Little brother, I'm the patriarch of the Chao family, Chao Xianbing. I heard that you're Ziyuan's friend? The middle-aged man walked in front of Chao Yunji. As soon as he entered the pavilion, he laughed out loud. His voice contained a warm tone. Zhuan smiled slightly and said, So it's the patriarch of the Chao family. I am indeed Miss Ziyuan's friend. Just now, this person said that he was going to look for Miss Ziyuan. Why didn't Miss Ziyuan come, and instead blew the patriarch of the Chao family here? Chao Xianbing didn't care about Zhuan's attitude. Instead, he said with a pleasant expression, It's like this. Ziyuan's father is heavily injured. She's worried about her father, so she went to her father's place first. So, she's unable to come see you, Brother Zhua. Speaking up to here, Chao Xianbing took out a yellowed piece of paper from his bosom and passed it to Zhuan. Brother Zhua, I heard from Yuan that you're a loose cultivator. You were able to cultivate to the 6th-step void stage with your identity as a loose cultivator. It can be seen that your natural talent is extraordinary. If you're able to join a great power, then your accomplishments will definitely reach a higher level. Zhuan glanced at the piece of paper in Chao Xuanbing's hand and sneered in his heart. This piece of paper was a contract. Zhuan roughly scanned it with his divine sense and roughly understood the contents. The general content of this contract was for Zhuan to join the Chao family. The Chao family would focus on nurturing him, and in return, Zhuan had to unconditionally obey the Chao family's arrangements and follow their orders. Chapter 2281. Suppression Zhuan received the contract, and then he raised his head to look at Chao Xianbing as he said, Miss Yuan asked you to give this contract to me? Chao Xianbing was still smiling. No, it's just that our Chao family loves talented people. Brother Zhua, you're a rogue cultivator. Joining our Chao family will only make things better for you. You'll also be a member of the Chao family in the future, so it'll be more convenient for you to do things outside. I see. Thank you for your kindness, Patriarch Chao. I'll keep this contract for now. I need to think about it, Zhuan said calmly. The smile on Chao Xuanbing's face gradually disappeared. He said indifferently, Zhua Xiaoyu, that's not good. Our Chao family is one of the top 5 forces in the Gulen galaxy. You'll only benefit from joining our Chao family. Sign this contract now. The smile in Zhuan's eyes disappeared. He slowly stood up and looked at Chao Xianbing indifferently. Patriarch Chao, are you trying to force me to sign this contract? Chao Xuanbing's face became colder and colder. Before he could say anything, Chao Yuanji sneered. Zhuo Xiaoyu, we're not forcing you. We're just thinking for you. Otherwise, do you think you'll have such an opportunity in the future? This is a rare opportunity. You should cherish it. Otherwise, you'll be killed. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with killing intent. This Chao Yuanji dared to threaten him in public. He was too unscrupulous. Did he really think that Zhuowen was a pushover? Yes, Yuanji is right. You won't get a chance every time. You'd better cherish it. Chao Xianbing said calmly. Zhuowen was so angry that he laughed. He took out the contract again and tore it to pieces in front of Chao Xianbing and Chao Yuanji. Chao Xianbing and Chao Yuanji thought that Zhuowen had changed his mind when he took out the contract. However, their faces darkened when they saw Zhuowen tear the contract in front of them. You're courting death. Chao Yuanji was furious. He waved his sleeve and threw a punch at Zhuowen. The surging divine power was like the endless water pressure at the bottom of the sea. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with killing intent. Originally, he wanted to talk nicely. Unfortunately, the two old men of the Chao clan were really unreasonable. Since that was the case, they couldn't blame Zhuowen for being impolite. Chao Yuanji's cultivation was slightly stronger than Xiong Yuan's. He should be at the peak of the 7-step Void Sky stage, while Chao Xianbing, the patriarch of the Chao family, had already reached the 8-step Void Sky stage. After Chao Yuanji attacked, Chao Xianbing didn't do anything. Instead, he placed his hands behind his back and looked coldly at Zhuowen. As far as he was concerned, Zhuowen was dead for sure. After all, Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the 6th step of the Void Sky realm, and the gap between him and Chao Yuanji wasn't small. Bang! A bloody light suddenly shot out from Zhuowen's spirit ring and fiercely hit Chao Yuanji's palm. Divine power surged out like waves crashing against the shore. Then, Chao Yuanji let out a muffled groan and retreated dozens of steps. The bloody light was also sent flying by Chao Yuanji's attack and landed beside Zhuowen. Needless to say, the bloody light was the Blood Immortal Sword. Although the Blood Immortal Sword's progress was fast, its strength was only at the peak of the 7th-step Void Sky stage, which was about the same as Chao Yuanji's. Therefore, the two were evenly matched. What a powerful divine weapon. Chao Xianbing waved his sleeve and immediately stopped Chao Yuanji's retreating figure. He looked at the Blood Immortal Sword floating beside Zhuowen in surprise, but soon the surprise in his eyes was replaced by greed. Chao Xuanbing's vision wasn't low. He could tell at a glance that the bloody sword was extremely powerful. It was comparable to the peak of the 7th-step Void Sky stage. If he could obtain such a bloody sword, it would be equivalent to obtaining a peak 7th-step Void Sky stage expert. Zhuo Xiaoyu, I'll give you one more chance. Give the bloody sword to us, and we'll let you leave the Chao family. What do you think? Chao Xianbing laughed. His eyes were full of arrogance, as if his words were letting Zhuowen take advantage of him. Idiot! Zhuowen didn't bother with Chao Xianbing. He formed a seal with both hands. Suddenly, a terrifying wave of energy erupted from the 4 corners of the hall. Then, 9 beast bone array discs flew out from the 4 corners and hovered above the hall, rotating violently. Trap and kill array. Chao Xuanbing's eyes narrowed. He punched the array at the edge of the array, but unfortunately, his punch couldn't break through the array. Clearly, it was a level 8 trap and kill array. Chao Xuanbing's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He knew that the white-clothed young man in front of him was a level 8 divine array master. Even the Chao family didn't have such a divine array master. It was unwise to offend such a divine array master. Zhuowen immediately activated the trap and kill array. Instantly, terrifying array attacks poured down like raindrops. Chao Xianbing and Chao Yuanji were immediately exhausted. Zhuowen, on the other hand, took out the bloody celestial sword. With a flash of bloody light, it flew toward Chao Yuanji and Chao Xianbing. Bang! Chao Yuanji was already on par with the Blood Immortal Sword. Now, he was also busy dealing with the trap and kill formation around him. When the blood immortal sword came at him, his hasty defense was of no use. In the end, the sword pierced his vital part. Chao Yuanji spat out a mouthful of blood. He was severely injured and could no longer withstand the power of the trap and kill array. He was instantly shredded into a bloody mist. Wait, this is the Chao family. How dare you kill people in the Chao family? Are you looking for death? Chao Xuanbing's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He was secretly regretting his actions. If he had known that the white-clothed young man was so terrifying, he wouldn't have provoked him. Although Chao Xianbing was an 8-step Void Heaven expert, he was only at the early stage of the 8-step Void Heaven expert. Moreover, Zhuo Wen's level 8 Death Trap Array was extremely terrifying. Even Chao Xianbing found it difficult to deal with it. He knew that if he continued to delay, he would die in this Death Trap Array sooner or later. Zhuo Wen completely ignored Chao Xuanbing's words. Instead, he formed a seal with his right hand and suddenly tapped the center of Chao Xuanbing's forehead. Zhuo Wen no longer concealed his terrifying pressure, and it swept over like a tidal wave. Chao Xianbing exclaimed in his heart. Although Zhuo Wen's cultivation was only at the level 6-step Void Sky, his aura was no weaker than Chao Xuanbing's. It was definitely not an aura that a level 6-step Void Sky cultivator could possess. Bang! Chao Xianbing was only able to block one of Zhuo Wen's moves. Then, Zhuo Wen's fist landed on his chest. Chao Xianbing spat out a mouthful of blood and couldn't hold on any longer. He was sent flying and fell to the ground. Who are you? Chao Xianbing fell to the ground. His face was as pale as snow. He raised his head and looked at Zhuo Wen in disbelief. He didn't expect this white-clothed young man to have such terrifying strength. He clearly knew that with his current strength, he was no match for this white-clothed young man. Zhuo Wen waved his sleeve and put away the beast bone array disc. He looked down at Chao Xianbing indifferently. Although the strength of Zhuo Wen's main body was far inferior to Devourer's doppelganger, after absorbing the true dragon's blood, his physical strength was comparable to Devourer's. Coupled with the trap and kill array, he easily defeated Chao Xianbing. Chapter 2282. Blackwater Prison. Due to the short duration of the battle and the fact that it took place within the death trap array set up by Zhuo Wen, the Chao clan wasn't alerted. Zhuo Wen slowly walked over to Chao Xianbing and said indifferently, I have no enmity with your Chao clan. I originally intended to talk nicely with you, but you're being overbearing. Tell me, where's Miss Ziyuan? Chao Xuanbing's body trembled, and he fell silent. He now knew that the gap between him and the young man before him was too great. If he dared to make the slightest move, he would be killed immediately. Zhuo Wen knew that Chao Xianbing wouldn't say anything, so he didn't say anything. He suddenly placed his right hand on Chao Xuanbing's head and began to search his soul. Although Zhuo Wen's cultivation was slightly inferior to Chao Xuanbing's, his soul was much more powerful than Chao Xuanbing's. Coupled with the fact that Chao Xianbing was heavily injured and powerless to resist, it wasn't difficult for Zhuo Wen to search his soul. Zhuo Wen's gaze turned cold after he checked Chao Xuanbing's memories. Chao Xianbing was truly vicious. He actually threw his own younger brother and niece into the Blackwater Prison for groundless crimes. Zhuo Wen had obtained all of Chao Xuanbing's memories, so he naturally knew that Chao Xianbing had set up all of this to frame Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan. His goal was to completely eliminate his second brother, who was a threat to his position as the patriarch of the Chao clan, as well as everyone related to him. Zhuo Wen also learned about the Blackwater Prison from Chao Xuanbing's memories. He knew that the Blackwater Prison was extremely vicious. Take me to the Blackwater Prison if you don't want to die, Zhuo Wen said coldly. Chao Xuanbing's body trembled. He hurriedly said respectfully, Junior dares not. Junior will take Senior to the Blackwater Prison right away. At this moment, Chao Xuanbing's heart was filled with bitterness. The young man before him was extremely powerful, and even his soul was terrifying. Chao Xianbing had actually searched his soul so easily just now. He knew that it would be extremely easy for this person to destroy his soul. Chao Xianbing didn't have the slightest bit of hope when facing such a terrifying expert. As he spoke, Chao Xianbing respectfully led Zhuowen into the depths of the Chao family. Along the way, the members of the Chao family all bowed to Chao Xianbing. At the same time, they looked at the young man in white behind Chao Xianbing with surprise. As long as one was not a fool, one could tell that Chao Xianbing was extremely respectful to the white-clothed young man behind him. Many members of the Chao family were guessing Zhuowen's background. Soon, they arrived at the Blackwater prison. Chao Xianbing stood outside the gate and pointed at a huge black mountain in front of them. "Senior, the Blackwater prison is right ahead. Bring me in. If anything happens to the kite, don't blame me for being impolite," Zhuowen said indifferently. Chao Xuanbing's heart skipped a beat. He groaned inwardly. He hoped that Chao Ziyuan hadn't been punished yet. Otherwise, he would really be in trouble. Thinking of this, Chao Xianbing hurriedly brought Zhuowen into the Black Mountain. Chao Xianbing was the head of the Chao family, so he didn't encounter any obstacles when entering the Blackwater prison. The interior of the Blackwater prison was a black stone passageway that extended in all directions. Chao Xianbing walked very quickly and arrived at a stone hall. At this moment, the stone hall was heavily guarded. There were groups of guards guarding it. In the middle of the stone hall, a pale woman was hung up. Zhuowen took a closer look. Wasn't this woman Chao Ziyuan, head of the Chao family? Why are you here? A bald man with a large saber came before Chao Xianbing respectfully. His eyes were filled with confusion. Slap! Chao Xianbing slapped the bald man's face, knocking him to the ground. "How dare you tie up my niece here? Do you not respect me, the head of the Chao family?" Chao Xianbing shouted himself hoarse. The bald man was stunned. He thought to himself, "Isn't this your order, head of the Chao family?" Just as he was about to argue, Chao Xianbing slapped him again. This time, the bald man's chin was cracked. The poor bald man didn't even know what happened before he fell unconscious on the ground. "Senior, it's my subordinate's fault. He actually locked up Ziyuan behind my back. If Senior is still angry, I'll kill him for you." Chao Xianbing turned around and cupped his hands towards Zhuowen with a flattering smile. Chao Xuanbing's humble attitude shocked everyone in the stone hall. Even Chao Ziyuan, who was hung up, was shocked. Everyone in the Chao family knew how strong Chao Xuanbing's personality was. No one dared to disobey Chao Xianbing, and Chao Xianbing wouldn't allow anyone to disobey him. It was even more impossible for him to be so humble in front of others. But now, Chao Xianbing was actually acting so submissive in front of a young, white-clothed youth in front of everyone. This truly shocked everyone. Chao Ziyuan's beautiful eyes finally landed on the white-clothed young man. Especially when she saw his face, she couldn't help but exclaim, "Big brother." Chao Ziyuan had mixed feelings. She knew that Zhuowen was quite strong and had killed the experts of the shark slaughtering fleet. However, whether it was the thin man or the strong man, their cultivation didn't exceed the sixth step of the Void Sky stage. Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the sixth step of the Void Sky stage. The gap between him and Chao Xianbing, who was at the eighth step of the Void Sky stage, was not small. But now, Chao Xianbing was speaking so humbly to Zhuowen. Chao Ziyuan knew that there was only one possibility, and that was that this Zhuowen was definitely stronger than Chao Xianbing. Otherwise, Chao Xianbing wouldn't have shown such a respectful expression. Zhuowen glanced at Chao Xianbing indifferently. He knew that this old man was putting on an act for him to see. "What are you looking at? Hurry up and put Ziyuan down." Chao Xianbing saw that Zhuowen didn't reply, so he tactfully shouted at the others in the stone hall. After Chao Xianbing shouted, the stone hall immediately became lively. Two of the soldiers hurriedly stepped forward and put Chao Ziyuan down, then brought her to Chao Xianbing. "Ziyuan, your uncle didn't manage things well and caused you to suffer. How about this? Your uncle won't let you suffer. Whatever compensation you want, your uncle will fulfill your wish." Chao Xianbing looked kindly at Chao Ziyuan. His voice was filled with deep concern. Unfortunately, Chao Ziyuan completely ignored him. She looked at Chao Xianbing and said coldly, "I don't want anything. I only want you to immediately release my father. In the future, my father and I will have nothing to do with your Chao clan." Ever since she found out that Chao Xianbing had schemed to harm her father, no one in the Chao clan had pleaded for her father or said a word of justice. Chao Ziyuan was thoroughly disappointed in the Chao clan. She decided that after saving her father, she would leave the Chao clan. "You heard what Miss Ziyuan said, right? Release her father," Zhuowen said indifferently. Chao Xianbing revealed a difficult expression. However, under Zhuowen's cold gaze, he could only nod and agree. "Come with me." Chapter 2283. Chao Feng. The passageway emitted an unpleasant stench. After about an hour, Chao Xianbing stopped and pointed at the iron fence in front of them. "Second brother is locked in there." At this moment, Zhuowen's gaze passed through the iron fence and landed on a figure hanging on an iron pillar. This figure's hands were chained and hung on the iron pillar. This person's hair was disheveled and his head drooped. He was naked and his body was covered with wounds. Upon closer inspection, there was not a single patch of normal skin. Inside the iron fence, the incomparably black water submerged this person's body from the head down. Zhuowen could clearly see that there were countless black insects in the black water, constantly moving into the wounds on this person's body. This person's head drooped numbly, as if he had lost all sense of pain. "Father." Chao Ziyuan's beautiful eyes streamed with tears. When she was about to throw herself at the iron fence, she was stopped by Zhuowen. Zhuowen took out 9 beast bone array discs and placed them in front of the iron fence. The beast bone array discs then arranged themselves into a strange array. Following that, waves of invisible waves appeared on the surface of the iron fence. Finally, the iron fence shattered into pieces. Zhuowen's right hand formed a seal. The black water floating inside the iron fence suddenly dispersed and disappeared. All of it was annihilated by the power of the beast bone array discs. When Chao Xianbing saw Zhuowen's move, the fear in his eyes became even more intense. He was certain that this white-clothed youth in front of him was not an ordinary level 8 divine array master. He knew that he could not afford to offend such an expert. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and gently placed this disheveled figure in front of Chao Ziyuan. At this moment, Zhuowen finally noticed the wounds on this person's body. His gaze couldn't help but freeze. This person's injuries were extremely terrifying. Almost all of the flesh on his body had been gnawed away, leaving only a thin layer of flesh stuck to the bones. Inside the bones, there were all wriggling black insects. Countless of them were wriggling in this person's chest and abdomen, making one's scalp tingle. If this person didn't have a trace of life remaining, Zhuowen would have thought that this person was dead for sure. When Chao Ziyuan saw Chao Feng in such a state, her tears couldn't help but flow down. Chao Xuanbing's eyes flickered. He carefully glanced at Zhuowen, but his heart was pounding. From Chao Xuanbing's point of view, he knew that Chao Feng was basically impossible to save. He was afraid that Chao Ziyuan was blinded by hatred. She would recklessly ask this white-clothed youth to kill Chao Feng. Chao Ziyuan and Chao Feng. Chao Feng was Chao Xuanbing's. Chao Xianbing was Chao Feng's was. Chao Xianbing had Chao's. Xianbing didn't care. And Chao Xuanbing's didn't was Xianbing was of the Xianbing. Chao Xianbing and Lu could Chao Feng. "Miss Ziyuan, move aside for a moment. Your father can still be saved," Zhuowen said solemnly. Chao Ziyuan, who was originally grief-stricken, was immediately overjoyed after hearing this. Chao was a Chao Feng, of course. She Chao could not phone. She was she Chao. Zhuowen quickly thanked him and gave up her seat. Zhuowen, on the other hand, had a solemn expression. He had the heavenly domain starry sky essence on him. Chao Feng was not dead yet. As long as he consumed the heavenly domain starry sky essence, he would be able to recover by more than half. The black insects had to be taken out before Zhuowen could help Chao Feng recover. Otherwise, even if he consumed the heavenly domain starry sky essence, it would be useless. Thinking of this, Zhuowen's surging divine soul entered Chao Feng's body like countless tiny tentacles. Then, he used the soul-slaying technique to kill the black insects. Zhuowen's movements were very gentle. He didn't dare to act recklessly. Otherwise, even Chao Feng's life would be annihilated by the soul-slaying technique. After half an hour, the black insects in Chao Feng's body were finally expelled by Zhuowen. Then, Zhuowen took out a drop of heavenly domain starry sky essence from his spirit ring and fed it to Chao Feng. After consuming the heavenly domain starry sky essence, Chao Feng, who was on the brink of death, had his life force rapidly strengthened. His flesh and blood grew back. In less than a quarter of an hour, Chao Feng opened his eyes and looked around in a daze. "Father, you're finally awake." Chao Ziyuan threw herself into Chao Feng's arms. Chao Xianbing, who was watching from the side, was shocked. He obviously didn't expect Zhuowen to save Chao Feng in such a short time. "I didn't die," Chao Feng muttered to himself. Chao Feng muttered to himself as he hugged Chao Ziyuan. His gaze quickly landed on Chao Xianbing. He didn't get angry, and instead calmly said, "Big brother, can you give me an explanation? I don't think I have done anything wrong to the Chao family. Why are you doing this to me?" Chao Xuanbing's eyes flickered, but he didn't say anything. Chao Feng shook his head and stopped questioning Chao Xianbing. Instead, his gaze fell on Zhuowen. He looked at Zhuowen from head to toe. Then, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times to Zhuowen. He said, "I, Chao Feng, will never forget your kindness in saving my life." Although Chao Feng was on the brink of death, he was still conscious. Therefore, he knew that his life was saved by this young man in white. Zhuowen flicked his sleeve and helped Chao Feng up. He said, "Uncle Chao, you don't have to be so polite. Ziyuan is my friend. This is what I should do." As far as Zhuowen was concerned, saving Chao Feng was as easy as lifting a finger. Since he could help, he naturally wouldn't refuse. "How do you plan to deal with Chao Xianbing? If you want to kill him and become the new head of the Chao family, I can help you," Zhuowen said again. Chao Feng was shocked. Even though he knew that the young man before him wasn't simple, he only thought that the young man's strength was on par with Chao Xianbing. That was why Chao Xianbing was so polite to the young man. However, he never expected the young man to be so arrogant. He actually said that he would kill Chao Xianbing and make him the head of the Chao family. He didn't take Chao Xianbing seriously at all. "Senior, I was wrong. Please let me live. I'm willing to give up the position of patriarch to my second brother. I only ask that you don't kill me." Chao Xianbing couldn't care about his so-called dignity any longer. He knelt on the ground with a thump. He knew that it was extremely easy for the young man to kill him. If Chao Feng really agreed, then he would definitely die. Zhuowen paid no attention to the trembling Chao Xianbing. Instead, he looked at Chao Feng and said, "You decide." Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan were simply flabbergasted. Obviously, they hadn't expected Chao Xianbing to kneel and beg for mercy just because of a single sentence from Zhuowen. They were trembling with fear. From this, it could be seen that the young man before them was far more terrifying than they'd imagined. "Second brother, it's all my fault. Please don't kill me. I'm willing to give up the position of patriarch. Please, I beg this senior." Chao Xianbing immediately kowtowed to Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan when he saw that Zhuowen wasn't moved. Chapter 2284. Eroding Bonjuan glanced at Chao Feng in surprise. He didn't expect Chao Feng to be so magnanimous. Chao Xianbing had caused him to be in such a state, yet he still intended to forgive Chao Xianbing. However, this was Chao Feng and Chao Xuanbing's family matter, so Zhuowen didn't intend to interfere. Since that's the case, then forget it. Zhuowen nodded and didn't continue attacking. Instead, he said, "You two can leave later. I still have some matters that I need your help with. Chow Feng hurriedly said, Senior, please tell us what you need. This junior will do his best to help you. We'll talk about this later. Zhuowen waved his hand. His gaze fell on Chao Xianbing, who wasn't far away, and he said indifferently, Why aren't you scramming? Chao Xianbing obediently stood up and left the place in a hurry. As soon as Chao Xianbing left, Zhuowen also left the Blackwater prison with Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan. Zhuowen stood outside the Blackwater prison and looked at it indifferently. Then he flicked his finger, and a divine sword wrapped in violent lightning and fire energy shot out. Xiao He, destroy the Blackwater prison, Zhuowen said in a deep voice. Xiao He, who was sitting on the sword's hilt, chuckled. He controlled the Thunderfire sword and turned it into a sword ray. Rumble. The Thunderfire sword slashed out fiercely. Instantly, lightning and fire energy shot out like an endless rain and fell on the Blackwater prison. Xiao He's strength grew rapidly. Although Xiao He hadn't displayed his true strength, Zhuowen guessed that this guy was at least at the intermediate Void Sky, 8 steps Void Sky realm. It was more than enough to destroy the Blackwater prison. Rumble. The lightning and fire energy was too terrifying. The black rocks outside the Blackwater prison were directly melted by the lightning and fire energy. Within 10 breaths, the huge Blackwater prison was completely annihilated into nothingness under the bombardment of the frightening lightning and fire energy. The destruction of the Blackwater prison shocked the entire Chao family. Chao Xianbing, who had left the Blackwater prison, looked at the scene in fear. He was shocked and fearful. The interior of the Blackwater prison was full of restrictions. Even he would have to spend some effort to destroy it. However, the white-clothed young man had destroyed the entire Blackwater prison just by summoning another divine sword. How could Chao Xianbing not know the difference between him and a white-clothed young man? Thinking of this, Chao Xianbing finally let go of the last bit of resistance in his heart. Let's go. After destroying the Blackwater prison, Zhuowen brought Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan away from the Chao family. The Chao family, on the other hand, was in an uproar. The Blackwater prison had existed since the Chao family's establishment. Now that it was destroyed, it could be said to be an unprecedented matter. The Ancient Orchid Restaurant was the most famous restaurant in the Ancient Orchid Celestial River. Zhuowen brought Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan to sit by the window on the second floor of the Ancient Orchid Restaurant, silently tasting the restaurant's famous wines and delicacies. Zhuowen put down his wine cup and looked at Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan with a smile. He said, I have heard of the famous space-time quicksand river. This time, I came to the Guling Galaxy mainly for the space-time quicksand river. However, I heard from Miss Ziyuan that the entrance to the space-time quicksand river collapsed 1,000 years ago. Therefore, it is basically impossible for ordinary people to enter. The only way is through the quicksand family. As for the specific conditions to enter the space-time quicksand river, can the two of you tell me? Chao Feng was stunned. He immediately reacted and said in a deep voice, Senior, so you plan to enter the space-time quicksand river? The method to enter the space-time quicksand river is indeed guarded by the quicksand family. However, if you want to enter, you need the permission of the quicksand family's strongest expert, Kuang Li. Zhuowen nodded his head. Chao Ziyuan had told him about this before, so he wasn't surprised. How can I obtain Kuang Li's permission? Zhuowen continued to ask. Chao Feng's expression became a little awkward as he smiled and said, Obtaining Kuang Li's permission is actually both simple and difficult. What do you mean? Zhuowen asked in surprise. If you want to enter the space-time quicksand river, you must give Kuang Li a gift. Only something that satisfies Kuang Li can obtain permission to enter the space-time quicksand river, Chao Ziyuan interjected. Hearing this, a strange light flashed across Zhuowen's eyes. He had always thought that obtaining Kuang Li's permission would be some kind of trial or test, but he never expected that it would actually be a gift. The more valuable the gift, the better. Even though Zhuowen felt it was very strange, he still asked the question in his heart. There should be a standard for giving a gift, right? However, Chao Feng shook his head and said, Kuang Li's temperament is rather strange and temperamental. The more valuable the gift, the better it is to his taste, the better it is. If it happens to be something that Kuang Li needs, even a level 1 divine medicine might be approved. If it doesn't suit his taste, even a level 8 divine medicine might not necessarily be approved. Zhuan nodded when he heard this, and then he said, I hope Miss Yuan and Uncle Chao Feng can lead me over to the Quicksand clan. Chao Feng nodded. After he found out that Zhuan wanted to enter the space-time Quicksand River, Chao Ji knew that Zhuan definitely wanted to go to the Quicksand family. Senior, follow me. I've been to the Quicksand family a few times, and I know some friends there. I can recommend Senior to enter the Quicksand family, Chao Feng said with a smile. Thank you, Uncle Chao Feng. Also, Uncle, don't call me Senior, just call me by my name, Zhuan said with a happy expression. Chao Feng said seriously, don't say that. Your cultivation is higher than mine, so it's not wrong for me to call you Senior. However, if you're not used to it, I'll call you Brother Zhuan in the future, haha. Zhuan smiled slightly. The three of them chatted for a while longer before getting up and preparing to leave the Gulen restaurant. Oh, so it's the Chao family's second master and Miss Yuan. What a coincidence to be able to meet the two of you here. An untimely voice suddenly sounded out from behind. Zhuan, Chao Feng, and Chao Yuan turned around and saw a tall and thin man with a deathly pale face slowly walking over. Behind this tall and thin man, there were 4 people trembling in fear. Looking carefully, these 4 people all had powerful auras. They were all experts of the 7th level of Void Sky. As for the tall and thin man walking at the front, his aura was the strongest. Zhuan could tell with a glance that this tall and thin man's cultivation had reached the peak of the 7th level of Void Sky, and the 4 people behind him were basically only at the early stage of the 7th level of Void Sky. Such a team, no matter where it was, could not be underestimated. It's the captain of the Shark Fleet, Shirgu. Such a big shot actually appeared in the Gulen restaurant. Looking at Shirgu's appearance, he should be here for Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan. How did these two offend such a troublesome fellow like Shirgu? Chapter 2285. One move. Chao Feng looked at Shirgu with hostility. He had learned from Chao Ziyuan that she was chased by the shark slaughtering fleet on her way back to the Chao family and almost lost her life. Therefore, Chao Feng didn't have a good impression of the shark slaughtering fleet. Shirgu, I don't have any relationship with you. Get lost now and don't appear in front of me, Chao Feng said coldly. Shirgu's eyes were cold as he coldly snorted. He first glanced at Chao Ziyuan, who was beside Chao Feng, before his gaze landed on Zhuo, who was standing behind Chao Feng. Chao Feng's cultivation was also at the peak of the Void Sky 7th step, and he was second only to Chao Xianbing in the Chao family. Shirgu wasn't confident that he could defeat Chao Feng. Moreover, after Chao Ziyuan failed the assassination mission, Shirgu didn't care much about it. What he cared about was the death of 2 of his subordinates. Moreover, they died in the hands of an unknown brat. Shirgu stared coldly at Zhuan and grinned. Void Sky 6th step? Not bad, not bad. Looking at your young age, you can cultivate to the Void Sky 6th step. It's obvious that your talent is excellent. Shirgu looked at Chao Feng and said coldly, Second Master Chao, I'm not here for you today. I'm here for the brat behind you. This brat is very courageous. He killed many of my shark slaughtering fleet's people. Hearing this, Chao Feng's gaze became extremely strange. Chao Feng had personally experienced Zhuan's strength in the Chao family. Even Chao Xianbing was scared to the point of kneeling in front of Zhuan. It was obvious that Zhuan's strength was definitely above the Void Sky 8th step. It wasn't that Chao Feng looked down on Shirgu, but Shirgu was only at the peak of the Void Sky 7th step. His strength was much weaker than Chao Xuanbing's. Even Chao Xianbing didn't dare to provoke Zhuan. This Shirgu must have a screw loose in his head. He actually dared to provoke Zhuan. Wasn't he seeking his own death? The crowd was in an uproar, and some even shook their heads. They all thought that Shirgu would look for Chao Feng to cause trouble. These were 2 great experts at the peak of Void Sky 7th step. If they really fought, then it would be a good show. But to their disappointment, not only did the two of them not meet, Shirgu even found the white-clothed youth who was only at the Void Sky 6 steps. The difference between Void Sky's 6th step and Void Sky's 7th step was not small. In their opinion, if Shirgu really looked for trouble with the white-clothed youth, the white-clothed youth would definitely die. Of course, there were also some people who were filled with righteous indignation. They felt that Shirgu was bullying the weak. Chao Feng, you don't have to interfere in this matter today. If you interfere, you can't blame me for being ruthless. Shirgu said in an imposing manner. The strange look in Chao Feng's eyes grew even more intense. He shook his head and said, I won't interfere in this matter. If you want to take revenge on Brother Zhua, I won't stop you or oppose you. Shirgu raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect Chao Feng to be so easy to talk to. From the way Chao Feng and the white-robed young man chatted happily at the table, it was clear that Chao Feng and the white-robed young man had a good relationship. Originally, Shirgu wanted to pay a price to prevent Chao Feng from interfering. But now, he discovered that Chao Feng had no intention of helping the white-robed young man. Only Zhuowen knew that in Chao Feng's eyes, Shirgu was just a clown. Chao Feng naturally wouldn't help Zhuowen block Shirgu. Little bastard, if you have the guts, come out of the Gulan restaurant and fight with me. If you don't, you can be a coward. I will wait outside the Gulan restaurant until you come out. Shirgu coldly looked at Zhuowen and said. Zhuowen found it funny. He glanced at Shirgu, stepped on the air with his right foot, and flew out of the Gulan restaurant. He said indifferently, I'm not interested in being a coward. As for fighting with you, there's no need. I only need to use one move. One move? I think you won't even have the chance to use one move. Shirgu was startled at first, but then he laughed coldly and also jumped out of the Gulan restaurant. It was obvious that Shirgu had misunderstood Zhuowen's meaning. This brat is quite gutsy. He actually rushed out of the Gulan restaurant to fight with Shirgu so straightforwardly. Although his guts are not small, he is brave but not smart. He is too sharp. I'm afraid he will die young. When Zhuowen and Shirgu flew out of the Gulan restaurant, many cultivators in the restaurant were waiting with raised heads, their eyes revealing an expression of watching a show. Of course, in the eyes of most people, Shirgu would definitely win this battle. After all, Shirgu's cultivation was much higher than the white-robed youth's. Brat, you have guts. As a reward, I'll let you make a move first. Make your move first. Otherwise, you won't have the chance to make your move again. Shirgu placed his hands behind his back, his eyes filled with arrogance and disdain. It was obvious that he did not place Zhuowen in his eyes at all. Shirgu's actions naturally received the cheers of many cultivators in the Gulan restaurant. There were even some cultivators who praised Shirgu for his gentlemanly demeanor. Are you sure? Zhuowen said indifferently. You talk a lot of nonsense. If I let you make the first move, then make the first move. Why are you still talking so much nonsense? Shirgu frowned and scolded Zhuowen rather impolitely. However, not long after he finished scolding, his expression suddenly changed. Zhuowen took out an ink-black phagocytosis from his spirit ring. Then, the phagocytosis was taken out and instantly expanded to several hundred feet in size. It rumbled and smashed down, heavily smashing in front of Shirgu. The phagocytosis had already unlocked 2,000 restrictions. Its power was much more terrifying than before. As soon as the phagocytosis appeared, the surrounding space began to tremble and compress violently. This terrifying power immediately alarmed the entire Gulan restaurant and the surrounding starry sky. Shirgu's pupils shrank to the size of needles. His heart was beating violently. A sense of death spread from his heart. He knew he was finished. The phagocytosis's power was too terrifying. Shirgu also remembered the mocking smile on Chao Feng's face. At first, he did not understand, but now he did. He understood that this white-robed young man was not an ordinary Void Sky 6 steps expert, but an expert who was far more terrifying than him. However, it was too late for regrets. The phagocytosis fell in front of him like a mountain. Shirgu could only try his best to block the phagocytosis. Otherwise, he would really die here. Thinking of this, Shirgu raised both of his hands. Then, a terrifying divine power gushed out. Boom! Unfortunately, Shirgu's defense was in vain. The phagocytosis was like a hot knife through butter. It easily crushed Shirgu's entire body like a piece of tofu. Shirgu's entire body was crushed into countless pieces. Just like that, he died in front of everyone's eyes. At this moment, the entire Gulan restaurant fell silent. Everyone stared blankly at the huge phagocytosis outside, as well as Shirgu, who was crushed into powder under the phagocytosis. Chapter 2286. Lugu, let's go. Zhuowen no longer paid attention to the stupefied cultivators in the Gulan restaurant. With a wave of his sleeve, he summoned a flying ship, beckoned Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan aboard, and then left. It was not until a long time after Zhuowen left that the silent Gulan restaurant finally burst into an uproar. The chief commander of the shark slaughtering fleet, Shirgu, was quite famous in the Gulan galaxy and was one of the few seven-step void sky experts. But today, Shirgu challenged a junior with a 6 steps void sky cultivation and was defeated in a single move. This shocked everyone in the old Orchid Star River. The Quicksand family was located in the central region of the Gulan galaxy. From a distance, it could be seen that the Quicksand family occupied hundreds of the best life planets in the central region of the Gulan galaxy. With so many life planets connected together, they formed a dazzling starland. This was the Quicksand family. Under Chao Feng's guidance, Zhuowen's flying ship quickly entered the Quicksand family's territory, but it was intercepted halfway. A team of black-armored soldiers intercepted the flying ship. This team stood on the back of a huge star beast. The leader of the team was a valiant young woman. This young woman was wrapped in black armor, and her black hair fluttered in the wind. Although her face was not beautiful, she had a different kind of charm. Zhuowen looked over and found that the entire group of cultivators, including the young woman in the lead, had arrogant expressions on their faces. When Zhuowen, Chao Feng, and Chao Ziyuan stepped off the flying ship, the young woman glanced at the three of them coldly and said, "Who are you? Why have you come to the Quicksand family?" Chao Feng said politely, "This one is Chao Feng of the Chao family. This time, we are here for the space-time Quicksand River. So it's the second master of the Chao family." The young woman's expression relaxed, and she immediately continued, "If you want to enter the space-time Quicksand River, I think second master Chao knows the rules, right?" "I know. Lugu told me a lot about the space-time Quicksand River," Chao Feng said with a slight smile. When the young woman heard Chao Feng mention Lugu's name, her beautiful eyes shrunk imperceptibly and her attitude became more cautious than before. The change in the young woman's expression naturally did not escape Zhuowen's eyes. It seemed that Chao Feng's friend had a high status in the Quicksand family. Otherwise, the young woman would not show such a cautious expression. "Second Master Chao, if you want to find Sir Lu, I can help you inform him," the young woman said warmly. Waving his hand, Chao Feng smiled. "There's no need for that. I have Lu Zhu's contact number. I just sent him a message, so he should be here soon." "In that case, we won't disturb Second Master Chao." The young woman nodded and left with her team. Not long after the young woman left, a long rainbow flew out from the depths of the Quicksand family and finally stopped in front of Zhuowen's group. This was a young man who was slightly plump. He had a sincere smile on his face and seemed a little naive. He gave people the impression that he was an honest and considerate person. Zhuowen glanced at the young man in surprise because the young man's cultivation was not high. He was only at the peak of the 6th step of the Void Sky realm. Of course, Zhuowen was not only surprised by the young man's attitude, but also Chao Feng's attitude towards the young man. Chao Feng hurriedly went up to greet the young man with a smile on his face. He faced the young man with great enthusiasm, but the young man's expression was slightly arrogant. Although Chao Feng's cultivation was far higher than the young man's face was still full of arrogance. Of course, he did not look down on others. After all, Chao Feng was not an ordinary person. He would not ignore him. On the other hand, Chao Ziyuan was unhappy. Her beautiful eyes glanced at the young man with a trace of disdain. Big Brother Zhua, this is Lu Zhu, one of the deacons of the Quicksand family. My father has always treated him as a friend and often shared good things with him. Moreover, he helped Lu Zhu whenever he could. However, ever since my father was imprisoned by Chao Xianbing, Lu Zhu disappeared from the world and did not ask about my father's affairs. Chao Ziyuan naturally saw the surprise on Zhuowen's face and could not help but transmit her voice to Zhuowen. Zhuowen nodded. He now understood why Chao Ziyuan showed such disdain towards Lu Zhu. It seemed that Lu Zhu did not treat Chao Feng as a true friend. However, from Chao Feng's attitude, it seemed that he really did treat Lu Zhu as a friend. What Zhuowen did not understand was that Lu Zhu was just a small deacon of the Quicksand family. How could he be so arrogant? What Zhuowen did not know was that the Quicksand family was the #1 family in the old Orchid Star River. They had the strongest powerhouses and the deepest heritage. Cultivators who could serve as deacons of the Quicksand family. Even if their cultivation was not high, their status and authority were sometimes much higher than the upper echelons of other forces. After all, this person represented the Quicksand family, a force that most cultivators in the old Orchid Star River could not afford to offend. This was also why Chao Feng was so polite to Lu Zhu, even though his cultivation was much higher than Lu Zhu's. Brother Lu, long time no see. How have you been? Chao Feng laughed and said. Lu Zhu also smiled and said, not bad. However, I haven't seen Brother Chao for a while. You should be busy with something, right? Chao Feng's expression turned cold as he smiled and said, yes, I was indeed busy with something and only found time to come out today. Speaking until here, Chao Feng pointed to Chao Ziyuan and Zhuowen behind him and said, this is my daughter, Ziyuan, and this is when Chao Feng introduced Zhuowen. He paused for a moment. He was a little embarrassed as to how to introduce Zhuowen. After all, Zhuowen was very strong, even more terrifying than his big brother Chao Xianbing. If he did not address him properly, it would not be good to leave a bad impression on Zhuowen. Just as Chao Feng was hesitating, Zhuowen took the initiative to step forward and said with a smile, I am Uncle Chao's nephew, Chao Ji. Brother Chao, so you have a nephew? How come I've never heard of it? Lu Zhu looked at Zhuowen in surprise, but said with a smile. Chao Feng could only nod. Since Zhuowen admitted it himself, he could only accept this fake nephew. He is the son of a distant relative of mine. He was not from the old Orchid Star River and only recently arrived. So, Chao Feng smiled and said. Lu Zhu did not doubt it, but he was also a little surprised. It was not that he could not see Zhuowen's cultivation. Zhuowen's cultivation had already reached the Void Sky 6th step, so he should not be more than 1,000 years old. Your nephew's talent is very good. Your fortune is quite good. Lu Zhu retracted his gaze and looked at Chao Feng. Chapter 2287. Absorbing the Starry Sky Divine Veins. By the way, what brings Brother Chao to the Quicksand family? Lu Zhu cut to the chase. Chao Feng didn't hold back and said, we've come for the river of space-time, Quicksand this time. I hope Brother Lu can give us a recommendation. In this way, we'll be able to avoid a great deal of trouble and procedures. With that, Chao Feng silently handed a spirit ring to Lu Zhu. Lu Zhu calmly put away the spirit ring. His divine sense had already quietly scanned the spirit ring, and a satisfied look appeared in his eyes. He smiled and said, no problem, but you may need to wait for about 2 months. Lord Kuang Lu is currently refining a Void Sky Divine artifact, and I'm afraid it will take another 2 months. I will inform you when Lord Kuang Lu comes out of seclusion. It's fine. Since Lord Kuang Lu is busy, we won't disturb him. We'll wait for 2 months. Chao Feng waved his hand, indicating that he didn't mind. Lu Zhu didn't look embarrassed at all. He smiled and said, how about this? I'll arrange a place for the 3 of you to stay. I'll inform you in 2 months. After saying that, Lu Zhu brought the 3 of them into one of the life planets of the Quicksand family and chose a rather elegant pavilion for the 3 of them to live in. After settling the 3 of them, Lu Zhu took his leave. After Lu Zhu left, Zhuowen couldn't help but ask, Brother Chao, Is Kuang Lu of the Quicksand family an artifact refiner? Chao Feng said in surprise. Brother Zhua, you didn't know? Lord Kuang Lu is not only the strongest expert in the Guilin Galaxy, but he's also a renowned artifact refiner in the Six Desires Heavenly region. Then what kind of void sky divine artifact can Kuang Lu refine? Can he refine a secondary heaven-breaking divine artifact? Zhuan's heart began to pound. I have 4 Dao fruits that I obtained from Fatima Yujia. These 4 Dao fruits can be integrated into the phagocytosis, giving the phagocytosis Dao rhymes that surpass a secondary heaven-breaking divine artifact. If I want to integrate the Dao fruits into the phagocytosis, I must find a powerful artifact refiner. However, in the vast universe, finding a powerful artifact refiner was even more difficult than finding a divine array master. This was because blacksmiths were much rarer than divine array masters. Now that Zhuan heard that you, Kuang Li, were a powerful weapon refiner, how could he not be excited? Chao Feng pondered for a moment and said in a deep voice, I once heard that Lord Kuang Lu had once forged a sub-heaven-breaking divine artifact, but the success rate was very low. However, he succeeded in forging a sub-heaven-breaking divine artifact, and this matter shook the entire Six Desires heavenly domain. Zhuan was shocked. This Kuang gravel was not simple. He had actually refined a secondary heaven-breaking divine tool. It had to be known that the majority of secondary heaven-breaking divine tools were either left behind from ancient times or formed naturally in the universe. The true forging method had long since declined. It was too difficult to find a powerful blacksmith now. Moreover, Zhuan wasn't asking the blacksmiths to forge a sub-heaven-breaking divine artifact. Instead, he was asking them to fuse the Dao fruit into the phagocytosis. This was clearly much simpler than forging a sub-heaven-breaking divine artifact. Since Kuang Li had successfully forged a sub-heaven-breaking divine artifact, fusing the Dao fruit into the phagocytosis shouldn't be too difficult for him. Brother Zhua, do you have something that you need Lord Kuang Li to refine for you? Chao Feng saw through Zhuan's intentions and couldn't help but ask. Yes, I have a damaged divine tool. This divine tool is very important to me. However, I haven't been able to find a suitable blacksmith before. This time, I met Kuang Li of the Quicksand family. It's really a bit of luck. Zhuan smiled. Chao Feng frowned and said, Brother Zhua, it's not that I want to pour cold water on you, but Lord Kuang Li's temperament is extremely strange. When he helps others refine divine tools, it depends on his mood. In the past 100 years, he has only refined one divine tool for one person. Other than that, he has only refined divine tools for experiments. So, Zhuan understood Chao Feng's meaning. It was extremely difficult to get Kuang Li to help him refine divine tools. Of course, if the price was enough, Zhuan didn't believe that Chao Feng wouldn't help him refine phagocytosis. Ever since he robbed many sects in the Great Brahma domain and had a rich harvest in the bone world, Zhuan was now a veritable rich man. His wealth could be described as comparable to a country. With his wealth, it shouldn't be too difficult to get Kuang Li to help him. After chatting with Chao Feng and Chao Ziyuan for a while, Zhuan locked himself in his room. After setting up a powerful formation, Zhuan sat cross-legged on the cattail hassock and his eyes flickered. It's time to increase my realm. This time, I obtained many high-quality starry sky divine veins in the small world on the bloodstained cliff. I wonder if these starry sky divine veins can help me break through the void sky 7th step? Zhuan muttered softly. With a flick of his finger, a starry sky divine vein that was dotted with stars appeared in front of Zhuan. The starry sky divine vein contained extremely rich starry sky energy. The starry sky divine vein that appeared in front of Zhuan was enough to cultivate thousands of true gods to the virtual sky world. Zhuan had hundreds and thousands of such starry sky divine veins, which was enough to show how rich Zhuan was now. Although such a starry sky divine vein was precious to ordinary cultivators and even priceless for Zhuan, it probably wasn't enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. Ever since he absorbed the true dragon's blood, Zhuowen discovered that the amount of energy he needed to cultivate was much greater than before. Furthermore, he discovered that although his realm was still at the 6th step of the Void Sky realm, his strength was constantly increasing, and at an extremely fast rate. Zhuowen knew that all of this was because of the blood of the real dragon. Therefore, this time, Zhuowen still felt a little uncertain about whether he could break through the Void Sky 7th step. Even though he had many Starry Sky Divine Veins, he was still quite worried. Let's absorb this Starry Sky Divine Vein first. Zhuowen shook his head and didn't think much about it. He closed his eyes slightly and pressed his hands on the Starry Sky Divine Vein. Suddenly, waves of rich starry sky energy flowed from the Starry Sky Divine Vein along Zhuowen's arms and into his 8 extraordinary meridians. 1 month later, Zhuowen suddenly opened his eyes. He looked at the dried-up Starry Sky Divine Vein in front of him and sighed in his heart. This is already the 10th Starry Sky Divine Vein, but my cultivation has only reached the peak of the Void Sky 6th step. I'm still a bit away from the Void Sky 7th step. Although Zhuowen had only consumed 10 Starry Sky Divine Veins, he knew himself well. He was still a distance away from the Void Sky 7th step. Even if he absorbed more Starry Sky Divine Veins, it wouldn't help him. After all, he couldn't comprehend it. If he spoiled it with excessive enthusiasm, the gains would not make up for the losses. Chapter 2288. Wind Disaster. Of course, there was another reason why he opened his eyes. It was because there was finally some movement from his doppelganger. His doppelganger had always been placed in the Songlan secret territory to absorb the disaster crystal veins for cultivation. When his doppelganger was a 1 disaster true god and a 2 disasters true god, his speed of absorbing the disaster crystal veins was extremely fast. But after Zhuowen became a thunder fire true god, his speed of absorbing the disaster crystal veins had become much slower. His doppelganger only needed 1 or 2 months to absorb a small mountain of disaster crystal veins. But now, it could not finish absorbing it even after a few years. Today, even though the Avatar failed to absorb all the calamity crystals in the surrounding hills, it finally welcomed the arrival of the long-awaited calamity, Wind Disaster. Walking out of his residence, Zhuowen sent a message to Chao Feng and quietly left the area where the Quicksand family was located. In the extreme north of the old Orchid Galaxy, there was a huge galaxy. This galaxy contained a terrifying amount of ice element. Looking from afar, it was simply an endless ice field. This place was considered a famous danger zone in the old Orchid Galaxy. It was called the Death Ice Field. The ice element in this place was extremely terrifying. It constantly flowed and raged, forming all kinds of ice element attacks, such as blizzards, ice blades, and so on. Generally speaking, riches and honor were found in danger. The more dangerous a place was, the more likely it was to be accompanied by great wealth and treasures. However, the Death Ice Field was definitely an exception. This was because this place was a famous wasteland. Once, the strongest expert in the old Orchid Galaxy, Quang Li, explored the Death Ice Field but found nothing. Because of this, coupled with the fact that the Death Ice Field was not small, it caused this place to be deserted. Now, there was no one at all. This was also the main reason why Zhuowen chose the Death Ice Field. After all, the best place to undergo the tribulation was naturally a deserted area. Otherwise, if the tribulation was too loud, it would be easy to be discovered by others. This was not the result that Zhuowen wanted. After entering the Death Ice Field, Zhuowen immediately felt a cold resistance. Obviously, the cold air in the Death Ice Field was quite terrifying. Otherwise, it would not have given Zhuowen such resistance. Zhuowen did not want to waste too much time in front of this cold chi, and immediately brought out the Everlasting Ice Lotus. The Everlasting Ice Lotus contained the origin of ice, and possessed a powerful commanding power that ruled over other cold energies. In front of the Everlasting Ice Lotus, The cold energy of the death ice plains was nothing. With the boundless ice lotus in hand, Zhuowen entered the deepest part of the icy plains of death like a hot knife through butter. Finally, he stopped in empty space. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and summoned the black-clothed Zhuowen. At this moment, the black-clothed one's face was flushed red as if he was enduring something. Zhuowen knew that his clone was enduring the erosion of the wind disaster. The wind disaster was the most terrifying of the three disasters. Moreover, the wind in the wind disaster was not the wind from the east, west, north, or south. It was not the wind from the north, nor was it the wind from the flowers, willows, pines, and bamboo, blowing from the fontanelle to the 6 bowels, passing through the dantian and the 9 apertures, dissipating the bones and flesh. The body will know the solution. It could be said that the wind disaster did not come from the outside to the inside, but from the inside to the outside, directly scraping the body. It should be known that even for a cultivator, the body was very weak. Moreover, there was no divine weapon to defend against the wind disaster. As the wind disaster came from the inside, it was imaginable how much damage it would cause to a cultivator's 5 viscera and 6 bowels. Moreover, Zhuowen also realized that ever since his clone became the real god of thunder and fire, the power of the wind disaster was much stronger than that of an ordinary cultivator. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Just as Zhuowen's original body was in deep thought, the clone that was floating in the icy plains let out a groan, and a gust of wind gushed out from the apertures on his entire body. The gust of wind was grayish-black in color. If one did not pay attention, one might think that it was smoke. However, if one were to take a closer look, it was actually a grayish-black gust of wind. The grayish-black gust of wind gathered continuously and formed a huge tornado in the end. As soon as the tornado appeared on the icy plains, the solid icy plains began to collapse and crumble. It was actually blown into fine powder by the wind. The gust of wind gushing out from the clone's apertures grew stronger and stronger, and the surrounding icy plains began to crumble. It was a spectacular sight to behold. Fortunately, there were no signs of human habitation within a radius of tens of millions of li around the death icy plains. Therefore, this sensational event did not attract the attention of the cultivators of the Gulanstar River. The wind disaster lasted for a full day and night. When the wind disaster finally ended, the black-clothed Zhuowen's entire body went limp and fell to the ground. Zhuowen's original body supported the black-clothed Zhuowen, but his gaze became extremely cautious. At this moment, the black-clothed Zhuowen was extremely weak. His 5 viscera and 6 bowels were almost completely destroyed by the wind disaster. If not for the fact that the black-clothed one's original body was devoured, which gave him an extremely strong vitality, the black-clothed Zhuowen would have already died. What a terrifying wind disaster. This is only the first wind disaster. Zhuowen's gaze was cold. After experiencing the first and second wind disasters, Zhuowen had actually grasped a certain pattern. Generally speaking, the first wind disaster was the most terrifying, and the subsequent ones were relatively simple. This was the first hurdle. However, the 9th wind disaster was another hurdle. The 9th wind disaster was far more terrifying than the first wind disaster. It was even more terrifying than the previous wind disasters combined. The third hurdle was the 14th wind disaster, and the final hurdle was the 20th wind disaster. This was the conclusion that Zhuowen had reached after experiencing the 2 wind disasters. This wind disaster should also follow the same pattern. The first wind disaster would be more powerful and terrifying than the following 7 wind disasters. Since Zhuowen could survive the first wind disaster, it meant that he did not need to worry about the remaining 7 wind disasters. However, when it came to the 9th wind disaster, Zhuowen would have to pay extra attention. After that, it would be the 14th wind disaster, and finally, the 19th wind disaster. Zhuowen knew that once he survived the 19th wind disaster, he would be teleported to the Tower of Hanoi. This was a backup plan that Lord Brahma had arranged for him long ago. Moreover, after surviving this wind disaster, Although Zhuowen did not find that the strength of his doppelganger had increased by much, the toughness of his internal organs was much stronger than before. Zhuowen knew very well that once his avatar's internal organs were repeatedly tempered and cultivated internally and externally, it would be very difficult for external attacks to inflict internal injuries on him. After all, even his internal organs had been tempered to be indomitable. Unless it was a fatal injury, Zhuowen would not easily suffer internal injuries. After the black-clothed Zhuowen took a drop of Heavenly Domain's Starry Sky essence, he was taken into the Songlan's secret realm by Zhuowen's main body to recuperate in peace. Zhuowen, on the other hand, left the icy field of death. After following the original path back to the residence arranged by Lu Zhu of the Quicksand family, Zhuowen went into seclusion again. In the remaining month, Zhuowen spent all his time on the Dao fruit and the heavenly Dao blood. The Dao fruit was born from the cultivation ground of a Dao-confirming expert, while the heavenly Dao blood was obtained by a Void Sky 9 Ascension expert who comprehended the heavenly Dao. Although the Void Sky 9 Ascension expert was far weaker than a Dao-confirming expert, the heavenly Dao blood was the essence of the heavenly Dao-confirming expert. Although the heavenly Dao blood was much stronger than the heavenly Dao blood, the essence of the heavenly Dao blood was the same as the essence of the heavenly Dao blood. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.